Chapter 1421, Provocation. When Shang Yuanhong and the others learned of what Meng Hao was doing, they did nothing to stop him. The sect leader contemplated the matter briefly, then chose to ignore it. As long as Meng Hao's actions didn't affect them or their plans, then he could do as he pleased. As long as he didn't do something to endanger the entire vast expanse school, then they didn't care what he did. Furthermore, Meng Hao was careful in his actions. He only used his own forces, and he only expanded into areas that the vast expanse school didn't already control. As his forces began operations, he chose to go into secluded meditation in 9th Paragon City and would only receive sporadic updates regarding affairs on the outside. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had gone by. During that time, Meng Hao left 9th Paragon City on only one occasion. The rest of the time, he remained in secluded meditation while his forces focused on expanding via war and other methods. Soon, the 9th Paragon's fame grew in the vast expanse as a whole. Eventually, open recruitment began, and vast amounts of new disciples swelled the ranks. During the 10 years that passed, the Paragons under Meng Hao's command were like sharp blades that cut down anyone in their path. As for the 100,000 cultivators who made up his main force, any time they fought in battle, they would overwhelm the opposing force. Although there were no paragons among the 100,000 cultivators, they were all elite experts and could also form together into a huge spell formation. As for the 3 female imperial lords and 7 Dao sovereigns, the 10 years passed for them in relative comfort. Originally, they had been under the impression that being selected as guards for the 9th Paragon meant that they were fated to become vessels to be drained in his cultivation practice. The truth was that throughout the 10 years, the number of times they actually saw Meng Hao could be counted on a single hand. A few other important events occurred during that time. On one occasion, something like a sandstorm sprang up around Meng Hao's location of secluded meditation. A figure appeared within that sandstorm, who spoke in an ancient, raspy voice. "You're not the 9th Paragon." Even as the words echoed out, a burst of Peak 9 Essence's power could be detected. Meng Hao opened his eyes, his expression calm as he faced the power of the Peak 9 Essence's level. At that point, the Dao Eye on his forehead opened up, and the essence power of his 8 hexing magics arose. It was with 3 eyes that he looked out into the sandstorm. Massive rumbling echoed out into the rest of the half-planet, after which the owner of the raspy voice laughed. "But I happen to like your personality and hostility, even more so your focus and determination." As his words echoed out, the sandstorm faded away and the figure left the inner planet. When he reappeared, he was back in the desert on the surface of planet Vast Expanse. His face was a bit pale, but his eyes glittered brightly. "Mid-9 essences," the old man murmured, "and yet he can face me directly and even leave me shaken. His control over the Dao Eye is at a level of perfection." A voice suddenly spoke out in front of him, "Many thanks." That voice belonged to none other than the sect leader of the Vast Expanse School. On that one occasion in which Meng Hao left planet Vast Expanse, he went to visit a battlefield upon which his forces fought. They were fighting a fierce group whose most powerful expert was a fierce beast at the peak of the 8 Essences level, a vicious black dragon. Because of it, this division of the 9th Paragon Cultivator Army had been fought to an impasse. Among Meng Hao's subordinates, there was an 8 Essences Paragon, who had been so seriously injured that he had been left with no option other than to send word back to planet Vast Expanse asking for assistance. When Meng Hao appeared, he extended his right hand and waved a finger, causing the starry sky to be crushed, and the vast expanse to fill with rumbling sounds. All life forms in the area trembled, including his own cultivators and the enemy horde. One by one, they dropped to their knees, as though massive weights had landed onto their shoulders. Any who refused to kneel were crushed to death in body and spirit. As for the black dragon, it let out a powerful shriek as its flesh and blood was flayed into a mass of blood and flesh. Terror appeared in its eyes as it prostrated itself in submission. Meng Hao turned and left. The cultivators under his command watched him leave, and their eyes began to glow with unprecedented fanaticism. That was especially true of the 8 Essences Paragon, who let out a gasp. He had seen 9 Essences experts fight before, but the terrifying display put on by Meng Hao just then made him realize that the 9th Paragon was no ordinary 9 Essences cultivator. On the final day of the 10-year period, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in secluded meditation in 9th Paragon City. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, and a glow like starlight could be seen. Anyone who was able to look into his eyes in that moment would feel lost, as though they were sinking eternally into the boundless starry sky. Floating outside the door of his secluded meditation facility was a white jade slip that emanated a soft light. It was that very jade slip which had awoken Meng Hao from his secluded meditation. "Has the day finally come?" he murmured. He reached out with his right hand and made a grasping gesture. Outside of the building, the white jade slip vanished. In the moment that it reappeared in his palm, his mind filled with the archaic voice of the sect leader's Peak 9 Essence's voice. "Old Ninth, the time has come. We must head to the necropolis." Meng Hao's fingers closed around the jade slip. His expression was the same as ever, but a glint of light passed through his eyes. Ever since the sandstorm rose up around his secluded meditation facilities, and the figure appeared with its raspy voice, Meng Hao knew that the plan the vast expanse school had been working on for so many years had finally reached a critical moment. As for Patriarch Vast Expanse's necropolis, Meng Hao very much anticipated exploring it. He was curious about this supposed method left behind by the Patriarch, to transcend from the 9 Essences level. By now, he had been the 9th Paragon for 10 years. Perhaps the sect leader had intentionally waited 10 years so as to be able to observe him. Although Meng Hao wasn't sure of the conclusion the sect leader had come to after such observation, it appeared as if Meng Hao had gained approval. "Let's go see what this Patriarch Vast Expanse's necropolis is like." He founded the Vast Expanse School and was himself a transcendent cultivator, one of only a few within this starry sky. Based on the ancient records of the Vast Expanse School, it seems that Patriarch Vast Expanse was the first person to ever transcend, even before the immortal God continent and the Devil Realm continent existed. A profound gleam appeared in Meng Hao's eyes as he thought back to many years ago, when the mountain and sea butterfly was speeding through the vast expanse, and he had encountered that old fisherman. "He was the beginning and I am the end," was the beginning he referred to, Patriarch Vast Expanse. 1. Meng Hao encountered the fisherman in chapter 1404. And was that entity within the green coffin vortex also connected to Patriarch Vast Expanse somehow? During the past 10 years, I have studied the histories available within the Vast Expanse School, and apparently, Patriarch Vast Expanse existed countless years ago. It seems that he could very well be from the same era as that old fisherman. Regardless of all that, there's still the mysterious origin of this bronze lamp. It wasn't until after I entered the Vast Expanse School that it began to change. That indicates there's some sort of relationship between them. Patriarch Vast Expanse. After some more thought, Meng Hao unhesitatingly stepped forward and then vanished. When he reappeared, he was in midair above 9th Paragon City. This was only his second time emerging, and even as he began to head toward the location of the main temple, he looked down at the city below and said, "Summon Su Yi and Xin Yue from 9th Paragon City, immediately." As his voice echoed out, the people below trembled and kowtowed respectfully. The 3 female imperial lords hurried out and offered respectful greetings. These 3 women all had different personalities, and that hadn't changed in the 10 short years which had passed. The cold woman was still cold, the scornful woman still failed to hide her scorn, and the warm woman was still just as warm. No different emotions could be seen on their faces. As for Su Yi and Xin Yue, they were the 2 8 Essences Paragons under Meng Hao's command, the 2 most powerful cultivators among his forces, and he planned to take them with him on this trip to the necropolis. Ignoring the 3 imperial lords, Meng Hao proceeded forward and soon arrived in the location with 9 altars. 4 people had arrived ahead of him. One was Shang Yuan Hong with his violet gold robe. Upon catching sight of Meng Hao, he smiled slightly and nodded. The other 3 opened their eyes, and when they saw Meng Hao, they smiled. From the expressions on their faces, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all. Beneath those 4 altars could be seen various 8 Essences Paragon subordinates, sitting there cross-legged. When they saw Meng Hao, they immediately rose to their feet and offered greetings. Meng Hao smiled, clasped hands, and then sat down cross-legged on the 9th altar to wait. Before long, the other 9 Essences Paragons arrived, along with the powerful experts who were their subordinates. After all the formal greetings were extended, everyone sat down. Then, rumbling sounds could be heard as a powerful divine sense spread out, and a rift opened above the first altar. An old man strolled out from within the rift. He was tall and had long, flowing white hair. His appearance instantly caused incredible pressure to weigh down. This was none other than the sect leader of the Vast Expanse School, who was at the peak of 9 essences. What had walked out just now was no divine sense clone, but rather, his true self. Shang Yuan Hong and everyone else, including Meng Hao, quickly rose to their feet and clasped hands. Greetings, sect leader. The 8 essences paragons were the most hasty of all to offer greetings. The sect leader nodded slightly and clasped his hands to return the greeting. Then he waved his sleeve and slowly began to speak. The hour has arrived, ladies and gentlemen. There is no need for me to emphasize the importance of what we are about to do. We have scouted the perimeter of the Patriarch's necropolis on numerous occasions, and know of the path that leads to the inner regions. Our goal is to reach the absolute center of the necropolis. Hopefully, we will be able to reach that goal. If we don't, then we will at least do our best to explore and map more regions inside. The eyes of all present began to shine brightly. The sect leader took a deep breath and then waved his sleeve, looking very serious. Instantly, the 9 altars began to vibrate as a teleportation process was initiated. It was at this point that 2 beams of light shot toward the altars. It was none other than Meng Hao's subordinates, the 2 8 essences paragons. However, the teleportation process had already begun, making it impossible for them to approach. Anxious expressions could be seen on their faces as they looked toward Meng Hao on the 9th altar. Before Meng Hao could say a word, the 6th paragon on the 6th altar spoke up. He was a middle-aged man with a long, hooked nose. Voice cool, he said, "Whose people are you? You're late, leave." Chapter 14:22, Leave My Mark. As soon as the 6th paragon spoke, coldness spread out in all directions. It wasn't frost, but rather was something that cut off the area from the outside. Beyond that barrier, Meng Hao's 2 subordinates, the 8 essences paragons, were shocked. Moments ago, they had been speeding forward, but now they were being pushed back. It was as if some powerful repelling force had grabbed them, and even as they attempted to push forward, was pulling them backward. The result was that they felt like they were being ripped into pieces. Their souls and their bodies seemed to be on the verge of separating, and the void around them looked as if it were about to be torn apart. Rumbling sounds filled the air, and blood sprayed out of their mouths. Xin Yue's eyes glittered coldly, and as for Su Yi, her expression was one of anger, and she let out a roar as she attempted to force her way forward. These 2 were proud women, and to be disgraced in front of the 9th paragon was unacceptable. If Meng Hao himself did this to them, maybe they could accept it, but from anyone other than the 9th paragon, it was treatment they could never put up with. "You think a bit too much of yourselves," the 6th paragon said with a cold snort, raising his right hand. However, in that very moment, an aura filled with infinitely colder killing intent exploded out from Meng Hao on the 9th altar. "Those are my people," he said as he began to stride forward. Each step caused thunderous booms to ring out. At the same time, intense power erupted out from his head, transforming into a vortex that spread out rapidly. Colors flashed and the wind screamed, and in that same moment he appeared in front of the 6th paragon and unleashed a fist strike. He didn't need any divine abilities to deal with the 6th paragon. He used his most direct method, punching. Everything shook as Meng Hao's fist rocketed out, seemingly a black hole that caused the starry sky inside of the half-planet to tremble, and the lands around them to quake. It was as if this fist strike were backed by the power of this starry sky itself. The 6th paragon's eyes widened, and he extended his right hand to meet the fist strike. BOOMM. As the fist strike landed, Meng Hao touched down onto the 6th altar, where he stood completely unmoving. The 6th paragon looked like he was standing in the middle of a violent windstorm. His hair and clothing whipped about, and he was trembling visibly. All of his skin, which was visible, seemed to sink into itself. As the boom continued to echo out, the 6th paragon coughed up a mouthful of blood and staggered backward uncontrollably. When he came to stop about 30 meters back, he forced himself to hold in the next mouthful of blood that he had been about to cough up, and then looked up, a vicious expression on his face. Roaring in anger, he spread his arms wide, and a massive eruption of essence power occurred. An enormous, amorphous blade formed which seemed capable of slashing through anything and everything. "Old Ninth," he yelled, "are you looking to die?" The other paragons were simply watching the events unfold, strange gleams flickering in their eyes. Meng Hao's fist strike just now had been shocking to behold, and yet none of them had done anything to interfere. As for the sect leader, he frowned and then looked over at the 6th paragon with an expression of displeasure. Almost as soon as the 6th paragon spoke again, Meng Hao waved his right hand, causing a powerful force to explode out. A windstorm formed, which smashed a hole into the tunnel being created by the teleportation power. That in turn allowed his subordinates to enter. His 2 subordinates looked very shaken, although Suya took everything in a bit easier. This was actually her second time seeing Meng Hao fight, as she had been observing when he dealt with the black dragon earlier. As for Xinyue, this was her first time seeing Meng Hao in action, and it caused waves of shock to pound at her heart. His shocking fist strike seemed capable of destroying an entire world and left her panting. As for the hole he had opened to let them in, it seemed to have been made in an almost casual fashion. Both of the women could only gasp in response. Without any hesitation, they flew into the area with the altars to appear standing next to Meng Hao. "Greetings, Paragon, we arrived late," they said, clasped hands and bowing. "I decide whether you're late or not," he said coolly. Then he strode forward to once again stand directly in front of the sixth Paragon. "It has absolutely nothing to do with you, sixth Paragon. Do you think I need you punishing my subordinates? Do I look like I need your help? Who the hell do you think you are? I think I need to leave my mark on you to help you remember what happened here today." As Meng Hao spoke, the sixth Paragon's eyes flickered with killing intent. He waved his arms, sending essence power exploding out, which transformed into a huge pitch-black head. Seeing that the two of them were about to start fighting, Shang Yuanhong stepped forward. With him were three other Paragons, who stood between Meng Hao and the sixth Paragon. "Old Ninth, just forget about what happened. Old Sixth, you're in the wrong here. Just forget about all of this. We're supposed to be on our way to the necropolis. Just cool down for now. If you really have so much energy to spare, you can put it into getting into the necropolis." A flicker of hatred passed through the sixth Paragon's eyes, and despite the interference of the other Paragons, he pointed out with both fingers, causing the pitch-black head to roar as it closed in on Meng Hao. Shang Yuanhong and the others looked on with flickering expressions, but before they could do anything, Meng Hao suddenly stepped forward. In the blink of an eye, an azure rock appeared, which then slammed into the pitch-black head. A boom rang out as the pitch-black head of essence collapsed. Meng Hao in azure rock form then became a beam of azure light that shot directly toward the sixth Paragon. The sixth Paragon's face fell, and he was just about to fall back when a fist shot out from the light and slammed into his chest. The sixth Paragon was knocked completely off of the altar, blood spraying out of his mouth the entire time. Before he could even react, green light flickered, and Meng Hao was on him again, unleashing another fist strike. Then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Booms rang out as the sixth Paragon was shoved backward over and over again. His chest was caving in, and he screamed miserably. His 3-8 Essences Paragon subordinates hesitated, but realized that they had little choice other than to fly out to try to stop Meng Hao. But then Su Yi and Xinyue stepped forward to stop them. "Scram!" Before the two groups could meet up, Meng Hao snorted coldly from within the azure light. He then appeared in bodily form and waved his sleeve, causing divine flame to blaze out toward the sixth Paragon's three subordinates. Their faces fell, but they were incapable of evading, and were sent tumbling back 3,000 meters, blood spraying out of their mouths. As for the sixth Paragon, he was completely shaken. How could he ever have imagined that Meng Hao would be so incredibly powerful? He was being attacked so viciously he could do nothing but retreat, and didn't even have a chance to fight back. He didn't get the feeling he wasn't a match for Meng Hao, but rather that he had lost the initiative and had no chance to actually fight back. By now, regret was building up in his heart, and he wished hadn't made an attempt to test Meng Hao. "Damn it!" he roared as Meng Hao closed in again. Booming sounds rang out as he sent out divine abilities, only for them to be instantly destroyed. Next came some magical items. They didn't last any longer than the divine abilities. The other Paragons watched what was happening with strange, thoughtful gleams in their eyes. As of this point, they were starting to gain an understanding of just how powerful Meng Hao was. And that was exactly what Meng Hao wanted, to establish himself. Coldness flickered in his eyes as he raised his right hand again. Shockingly, the power of space could be detected, slowly building up in power. It was none other than the 8th Hex's essence of space, of which he had gained enlightenment. When the sect leader saw what was happening, his pupils constricted. He took a step forward and waved his sleeve. "Enough, how far do you plan to take this fight?" The sect leader was at the peak of the 9 essences level, so the wave of his arm caused an incredible force to build up between Meng Hao and the 6th Paragon, shoving them apart. The 6th Paragon actually breathed a sigh of relief at being given a way out of the situation. He looked over at Meng Hao with killing intent flickering in his eyes. Unfortunately for him, he was still underestimating Meng Hao. "Like I said, I need to leave my mark on you." Even as his cold voice rang out, the Tao eye on his forehead opened up, and a boundless will erupted out. The entire starry sky shook, and all minds began to reel. In that instant, the power of the Tao Eye caused the divine ability just unleashed by the sect leader to be frozen in place in front of Meng Hao. Meng Hao then shot forward at a speed far surpassing anything from before. In the blink of an eye, he was right in front of the sixth paragon. The sixth paragon's mind was spinning and wanted to fall back, but felt as if he were stuck in mud. He was simply too slow. His pupils constricted as astonishment filled his eyes. The sect leader's face fell and he bellowed, "Old Ninth, stay your hand." He took a step forward to appear next to Meng Hao, whereupon he flicked his sleeve. That motion blocked Meng Hao's hands and feet and was just about to pull him away when Meng Hao grinned. His aura changed and a brutal air erupted out of him. Although his hands and feet had been immobilized, his head had not. He stretched his head out and bit down viciously onto the sixth paragon's neck, ripping out a huge chunk of bloody flesh. Blood sprayed out of the sixth paragon's neck and he screamed. He clamped his hand down onto his neck and shot backward. By now, there was no killing intent in his eyes toward Meng Hao, only intense astonishment. Of all the people he had fought in his life, this was the most brutal person he had ever encountered. He actually bit a chunk of flesh out of him. As far as he was concerned, this ninth paragon was completely mad. Meng Hao calmly swallowed the chunk of flesh and then said, "That's my mark." Then he wiped his mouth and walked back to the ninth altar. As he did, the surrounding cultivators watched him, their minds reeling. Even Su Yi and Xin Yue were left gasping. They would never be able to forget the brutal display put on by Meng Hao this day. This guy should never be provoked. Crazy, he's completely insane. The paragons were left gasping, looks of intense vigilance on their faces. The sect leader's face was extremely unsightly, and his mind was being battered by waves of shock. He stared at Meng Hao and then looked over angrily at the sixth paragon. Finally, he headed back to the first altar, his face very grim. The sixth paragon silently returned to his altar, his face pale, terror gleaming in his eyes as he looked over at Meng Hao. He wasn't afraid of cultivators with a higher cultivation base, but rather those who were completely insane. And Meng Hao was the most insane person he had ever encountered among 9 Essences cultivators. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he stood there, hands clasped behind his back as if nothing had happened. Behind him, Su Yi and Xin Yue looked at him with awe in their eyes. A moment later, the teleportation power was unleashed, and rumbling could be heard as a pillar of light rose into the air, and they all vanished. Expand. In the starry sky of the vast expanse, there were certain extremely mysterious locations. One, for example, was the Green Coffin Vortex. In such locations, the magical laws of the vast expanse were different, making it difficult for cultivators to enter them, even 9 Essences experts. Although Meng Hao hadn't known it originally, he came to be aware that such places were said to be created by transcendent cultivators. Only someone who had transcended could create a location that could cause problems for 9 Essences paragons. Furthermore, such locations were few and far between in the vast expanse. There were only a few in existence. Supposedly, some of those locations were related to the vast expanse society. Others were connected to the immortal god continent. The rest had to do with the devil realm. Apparently, all the forces which had produced a transcendent cultivator were connected to such places. Some such places were well known, while others were kept secret by various powerful factions and held their respective organizations' greatest secrets. They were secrets that wouldn't necessarily endanger those groups if they came to be known, but were kept hidden anyway. Patriarch Vast Expanse's necropolis was just such a place. The exact location of the necropolis was unknown, and the only way to enter it was via the 9 altars on the half-planet of the Vast Expanse School. In the past, people had speculated that the necropolis was not even located within the starry sky of the vast expanse. Some said that it was a location in some other world, where there was no heavenly Tao. Supposedly, the reason there was no heavenly Tao was because magical techniques were thrown into chaos in such places. Sometimes, certain magics couldn't even be used. For example, some locations were places incompatible with the aura of the vast expanse, which some people cultivated. When Meng Hao and the others appeared, he looked around and saw a starry sky stretching out. It was a real and true starry sky, with none of the mist that was pervasive in the vast expanse. There were 9 land masses floating out in front of them. Upon closer examination, it was possible to see that they were connected by bridges, although the bridges were not stable. They were constantly swaying and swinging back and forth. Surrounding the 9 land masses was a seemingly infinite field of drifting asteroids. Occasionally, they would emit strange fluctuations which provoked sensations of intense danger. There were no paths visible. "Now that we're here, we don't have much time," said the sect leader. "Only 1 month. Follow me and be careful not to lose your way. Don't interact with anything you see, whether it's a painting or a person or anything else. If you do, even those of you with 9 essences will perish." With a final look at everyone, he flickered into motion as he flew out into the starry sky. Everyone else followed along as if they had done so before. Meng Hao was the only one who seemed more cautious than ever as he followed along. His 2 subordinate paragons followed him, looking around vigilantly. The group was soon speeding along through the asteroids. The sect leader seemed to have mastered some method of travel that ensured they didn't encounter any restrictive spells, nor did any of the floating asteroids enter their path of travel. However, the result was that the sect leader's face was a bit pale. His eyes shone with the glow of augury. Clearly, leading the group in this way was not an easy task. Time passed. 4 hours later, Meng Hao noticed one of the 8 essences paragons up ahead suddenly stop in place and turn to the side with an expression of shock and disbelief. This man could shake the vast expanse with a single stomp of a foot and would count as the pinnacle of existence in virtually any world or realm. And yet, before anyone could warn or remind him of the dangers of the place, his body deflated like a popped balloon. In the blink of an eye, he withered up into a pile of desiccated flesh. His bones, flesh, and everything about him melted and then vanished without a trace. Not even his soul had a chance to flee. He died without even making a cry of alarm. The only thing left behind was his skin, which slowly floated away into the starry sky. Meng Hao was completely shaken, and everyone else felt their scalps tingling in shock. No one spoke. As they watched the pile of skin float away, laughter could suddenly be heard, at which point they noticed that, unexpectedly, the pile of skin was smiling. "If you want to stay alive, don't randomly look around," the sect leader said. "Keep your eyes on the person in front of you. We will follow this path for 3 days, and if all goes well, we will pass through this perimeter region into the first land of the Patriarch's necropolis." With that, he proceeded onward without another word. Meng Hao said nothing, but his eyes flickered. Then he proceeded along, keeping his eyes on the cultivator in front of him. Time passed. A day later, and after a bit of calculation, Meng Hao came to the conclusion that they had already traveled 70% of the distance, and that they would soon be nearing the first land mass. For the most part, the journey was frightening but not dangerous. However, another 8 essences paragon died. He wasn't transformed into a pile of flesh. Instead, he began to suddenly rot. At first, he didn't notice. Then the person behind him cried out in alarm. The 8 essences paragon spun around, and when he looked down at his body, his eyes fell out of their sockets. Everyone watched as he dissolved into a mass of blood that dropped down into the depths below. Meng Hao's vigilance grew. The surrounding asteroids would occasionally pulse with a faint light, and yet everything was absolutely silent as death. The sect leader moved slower and slower, until finally it reached the point where he needed to make long calculations before each movement. After a bit of observation, Meng Hao came to the conclusion that the sect leader's methods of augury and calculation had to do with the movement patterns of the asteroids. Even as he contemplated the matter, a cry of alarm could be heard behind him from Sohe. Meng Hao spun and saw the beautiful Xianxia, head turned to the side, expression blank as she apparently spoke to some unseen person. Her expression flickered, and then she nodded, and a rapturous look of joy appeared on her face. Even as she nodded, her body began to wither up. Meng Hao frowned, reached out, and tapped her forehead. A tremor ran through her, and the withering slowed but didn't cease. Suya's expression flickered with anxiety, and she was about to unleash some sort of magic to provide aid, when suddenly her expression also turned blank. She turned to the side in disbelief, then reached out into the void as if to grab something. Then she also started to wither up. Meng Hao's frown deepened, and he quickly opened his Dao eye. His aura spread out, turning into a vortex that swept out in all directions. At the same time, the sect leader and the other paragons turned to look at what was happening. The sect leader's face fell, and after a moment of hesitation, he gritted his teeth and made his way toward Meng Hao. The other paragons' faces flickered with hesitation, but seeing that the sect leader was approaching, they did the same. However, before anyone could get close, Meng Hao suddenly raised his hand and said, "Stay back. I should be able to handle this." His expression was somber, and even as he spoke, a murderous aura began to rise up from him, which rapidly turned into a raging tempest. The sect leader and the other paragons were people who were no strangers to slaughter. However, after seeing Meng Hao's murderous aura, their pupils constricted. That was especially true of the sixth paragon, who gasped. It was a murderous aura so intense that ordinary people couldn't compare to it. Not even this group of paragons contained someone who came close. How many people has he killed? I've never met someone who has slaughtered so many. Is this ninth paragon some sort of jinx, or what? Both the 9 essences paragons and their 8 essences subordinates were all completely shaken. So, thought the sect leader, he really is Meng Hao. It was as if that murderous aura which surrounded Meng Hao contained innumerable screaming souls. Moments ago, Meng Hao's face was very serious as he looked around with his third eye and saw a completely different world. Within the void of the starry sky was an enormous city. The asteroids around them were actually buildings in that city, and the entire place looked incredibly ancient, as if it couldn't even exist in modern times. What left Meng Hao even more shaken was that, unexpectedly, they were surrounded by countless figures. There were men and women, old and young, and all of them were cultivators. They were everywhere, and although most of them were simply walking to and fro, some would occasionally turn to look curiously at Meng Hao and the others. The figures were blurry, their faces pale, their bodies devoid of life force. In fact, what filled the entire area was a boundless aura of death. Several women were standing next to Xianxia, smiling as they tugged at her garments. It was as if they were trying to get her to become one of them. The same thing was happening to Sohe. Shockingly, there were even some figures next to Meng Hao who were reaching out to grab him. He took a deep breath as he realized that this place was actually a ghost city. Considering the level of his cultivation base, he was able to tell that all of these figures were ghosts, and there were so many of them that it would be impossible to count their number. A brief moment after Meng Hao's third eye opened and he looked around, all of the ghosts in the entire city stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. Countless gazes came to be fixed on Meng Hao, whereupon strange glows rose up in their eyes. Only a brief moment passed before they began to scream noiselessly and then rush madly toward Meng Hao. To be surrounded by so many ghosts left even Meng Hao feeling like he had fallen victim to a curse. His life force was fading, and an aura of death was threatening to engulf him. That was the moment in which his murderous aura suddenly erupted out fully, creating a vortex which swept out in all directions. Expand. Vast expanse. Dao body. No one could hear the murmuring voice except for Meng Hao. Even as the voice brushed against him, his murderous aura exploded out into a vortex which swept the ghosts away from Su Yi and Xianxia. However, there were simply too many of the ghosts, so many that Meng Hao's scalp was numb. As they closed in on him, he reached out, grabbed Su Yi and Xianxia, and shot toward the sect leader. Even as he sped into motion, he looked around and saw that more figures were appearing in the countless buildings which made up the city, figures which were even more powerful than those he had already seen. There was one path that had no ghosts on it at all, and further off in the distance, far, far away, Meng Hao spotted an enormous altar which rose high up into the sky. The altar was so enormous that it was clearly visible despite being a huge distance away. Looking at it more closely, it appeared to be hovering in the void above the first land mass. The number of ghosts on the first land mass was so large it was impossible to count. Further off, the other 8 land masses were difficult to make out clearly. Gradually, Meng Hao realized that on the 9th land mass, the land mass furthest away from him, there was a huge throne, upon which sat a person. That person's gaze pierced through the boundless starry sky to fall upon him. Apparently, this was the person who had spoken the words, "Vast expanse Dao body" moments ago. Now it began to speak again. The catastrophe comes, peak of the vast expanse, you are the end. All heaven fears the immortal. 1. This is the same all heaven as in all heaven immortal, all heaven Dao immortal, all heaven clan, etc. It's been a long time since the term was introduced, so I'm going to repeat the explanation of what it means. All heaven, Chinese letter could be transliterated as Luotian, and is a concept from real Taoist mythology. Among all the various heavens that exist, it is the absolute highest heaven. Luo Chinese letter is a character which can be translated a lot of ways, but in this situation basically means net. The idea is that this heaven stretches out to cover over all the other heavens like a net. However, instead of calling it net heaven, sounds like a bad internet cafe or perhaps a fishing shop, I will use all heaven. Incidentally, I've also translated the character Luo Chinese letter as Civ in the past, most notably in the name of the Black Civ sect. You have finally come. As the voice echoed out, the ghost seemed to go even crazier. At the same time, the bronze lamp within him began to flicker. It all happened in the briefest of instants. As Meng Hao retreated from the ghosts, he could sense madness within them, and yet they didn't seem malevolent. Somehow, they seemed anxious. Now was not the time to ponder the matter. As his murderous aura shoved the ghosts away, he closed his third eye. In that moment, everything vanished, although he could still sense an incredible coldness building up in the area. "Let's go," said the sect leader. Everyone began to move, although things were so chaotic, it was impossible to tell exactly which direction they were going. As they sped along, the cold aura behind them continued to grow. However, because Meng Hao had closed his third eye, the ghosts apparently couldn't detect their presence. After an hour, they emerged from the coldness, their expressions grim. As for Su Yi and Xin Yue, they looked guilty as they followed along silently behind Meng Hao. Other paragons immediately gave voice to their fury. "Damn it, what were you doing? Do you know how much danger we were in just now? How reckless, you nearly scared us to death." Although they couldn't actually see the ghosts, they understood that they had all just experienced a brush with death. Had the cold aura overwhelmed them, they would never have escaped and would have remained within it forever. Meng Hao didn't offer any explanation, but he did clasp hands and bow to everyone. Considering his cold disposition up to this point, the fact that Meng Hao made such a gesture caused the faces of most of the other paragons to soften. However, their expressions were still somewhat grim. The group was now on an unknown and incorrect path. All of them knew the potential consequences of taking an incorrect path. Meng Hao's apologetic clasping of hands was enough to silence most of the other paragons. However, the sixth paragon let out a cold harumph. "All brawn and no brains. You should have let those two subordinates of yours just die. Saving them got us lost. They deserved to die." Normally speaking, he would never have spoken in such a way after the battle he had just experienced with Meng Hao. But now that Meng Hao had earned the ire of the entire group, it was like throwing fuel onto the fire. "That's right, old ninth," chimed in the eighth paragon, his voice cold. "Simply clasping hands in apology isn't enough. This is a big matter. You got us all lost, and you know what a dangerous position that puts us in." The words uttered by these two caused the other paragons to frown. The sect leader looked over at Meng Hao with furrowed brow. Meng Hao looked back at him and said, "Many thanks for your assistance back there, sect leader." Actually, the sect leader hadn't provided him with much assistance at all, but Meng Hao could tell his attitude in the matter. The fact that he had turned back at all spoke volumes. Furthermore, the other paragons, with the exception of the sixth, had all been moving to help him. He wouldn't forget that, and it served to increase his goodwill toward the vast expanse school in general. "What did you see just now?" the sect leader asked. "A ghost city," Meng Hao replied. "This entire place is a city with the asteroids being buildings. We were surrounded by endless hordes of ghosts. This place is a ghost city that is invisible to the eyes of the living." Having heard this, the sect leader suddenly reached out and made a grasping motion. A rift opened up, and a profoundly ancient jade slip appeared, which he handed over to Meng Hao. "Take a look, is that the city you saw?" Meng Hao took the jade slip and scanned it. An image appeared in his mind, the vague image of a city that he instantly recognized as the ghost city he had seen. None other. When the sect leader heard that, a strange expression could be seen on his face. Looking somewhat excited, he asked, "Did you happen to notice a path?" Meng Hao thought back to everything he had seen, and recalled that one particular path which was devoid of ghosts. He nodded. The sect leader looked around quietly for a moment at the asteroids, mixed emotions on his face. Finally, he spoke to the group as a whole, his voice little more than a murmur. "The legends say that long, long ago, this place was a city so huge that the 9 land masses were only the central part of the city itself. Back then, it was known as the City of Saints. One day, the city disappeared overnight. Virtually everyone died. Countless lives, countless cultivators, countless beings, all dead. Their deaths were very bizarre and mysterious and happened in complete silence. Only Patriarch Vast Expanse and a few other people survived. They left together, after which the Vast Expanse Society came to exist outside of the Vast Expanse. Years later, Patriarch Vast Expanse returned, and chose to turn this place into his necropolis. According to most legends, he eventually perished here. Of course, other rumors state that he didn't die, but rather stayed behind alive to accompany the bones of his companions from the past. Supposedly, countless years passed, after which he departed, leaving behind the method for transcendence. In all the legends, the starry sky looked different back then. Supposedly, when the grieving patriarch Vast Expanse buried his companions, he transformed the starry sky into the vast expanse, for the purpose of accompanying his friends in death. The city you saw was the former city of saints. Old Ninth, please lead us along the path you saw. That is the way to get to the necropolis. He sighed after recounting the story to the group. Most of the people present had heard the stories before, but this was Meng Hao's first time. After a moment of silence, he thought of the world of the ghost city and of the figure he had seen on the ninth land mass. Finally, he nodded and turned to look off into the distance. Then, he led the way, with everyone following as he headed off into the void. At first, he had to choose his way carefully and with much thought. But about 2 hours later, he began to pick up speed. No more strange incidents or deaths occurred, making it seem certain that no ghosts were on the path they traveled. The sixth and eighth paragons didn't look very happy, but as for all of the other paragons, their eyes glowed with excitement. Soon, they were getting very close to the first landmass. However, it was at this point that, all of a sudden, a cold aura suddenly appeared. Everyone could sense it, and before anyone could even react, it increased in intensity by 100-fold, then 1,000-fold, then 10,000-fold, and even more. As boundless, icy coldness surrounded them, several aura streams appeared that struck fear into the heart of even Meng Hao and caused the sect leader's face to fall. Meng Hao stopped in place, as did everyone behind him. "Nice job, Meng Hao," yelled the sixth paragon. Not bothering with matters of face, he directly spoke Meng Hao's name. The eighth paragon frowned and glared at Meng Hao, eyes flickering with killing intent. "Damn it, you're not leading the way, you're sending us to our deaths." The other paragons' faces were grim and icy, and they began to rotate their cultivation bases. "Enough," the sect leader roared. Inwardly, he was sighing. The mission was a failure. Furthermore, even retreating would likely result in injury and loss, especially to the 8 essences paragons, who would survive only if they were lucky. The coldness which had risen up caused everyone's hearts to thump. The sect leader sighed bitterly. "The plan is cancelled. Let's fight our way out. We'll recover and rebuild resources to come back another time." With that, he prepared to leave. The sixth and eighth paragons glared spitefully at Meng Hao, and Xianxia Hong and the other paragons sighed. But then Meng Hao's eyes gleamed, and he suddenly said, "Hold on a moment." The sixth paragon spun in place, glared at Meng Hao, and smiled coldly. "What are you going to do? Don't tell me you want to stop us from leaving. What, you want us to stick around here to be killed? Meng Hao, your heart is twisted and evil. Do you really think we weren't aware that you consumed the ninth paragon?" "Shut your mouth," the sect leader barked. "Old Ninth, forget about the matter. I should have explained things in more detail ahead of time. We can come back again another time." Although the sect leader was irritated at this turn of events, he still tried to keep things civil. Meng Hao ignored the sixth paragon. "No, listen, I have the feeling that these ghosts harbor no ill will toward me." Even as he spoke, his third eyes opened. At the same time, the sixth paragon howled. "I can't believe you still dare to open your Dao. Wait, what?" Before he could even get through half of his sentence, the rest of his words stuck in his throat. His eyes went wide as he looked around. He could sense that, as of this moment, the coldness was actually emanating a sensation of subservience. The powerful entities therein that filled him with such fear were actually acknowledging allegiance. He wasn't the only one who realized this. All of the paragons could pick up on the clues. Expressions of disbelief appeared on their faces. As for Meng Hao, when he looked around at the world, he saw innumerable ghosts, all of them dropping to their knees to kowtow. And they were kowtowing to him. It was like watching a wave run across the surface of the sea, as countless ghosts dropped down onto their knees. What a shocking turn of events. Their previous madness had contained no killing intent, and their rush toward Meng Hao had not been because they wished him harm. Instead, they could sense on him the aura of their grand leader. Chapter 14:24. The Ghost Masses Offer Worship. Chapter 14:25. All Heaven Fears the Immortal. Although the sixth paragon couldn't actually see what was happening, considering the level of his cultivation base, he had a keen ability to detect and sense auras. As of this moment, all of the cultivators near Meng Hao could sense that the freezing aura was acknowledging allegiance. The sixth paragon's eyes went wide. Despite his strength and willpower, he was still shaken and gasped. The eighth paragon had the same reaction and stared around in complete disbelief at what was happening. The other paragons all had similar reactions. Strange glows could be seen in their eyes as they looked over at Meng Hao. What was happening now left them more shaken than when Meng Hao had fought with the sixth paragon. The sect leader sucked in a deep breath, glanced at the surroundings, and then looked back at Meng Hao. Suddenly, he had the feeling that all of the decisions he had made about Meng Hao, both earlier and just now, had been correct. Not even the real ninth paragon would have been able to do this, he thought. This is something that exceeds the powers of the Tao I. As of this moment, the sect leader had absolutely no question at all about Meng Hao's true identity. At the same time, he completely approved of him. The sixth paragon began to speak without even thinking about it. If you could have done this before, then why did you wait until just now? The other paragons nearby him began to edge away and put as much space between them and him as possible. Before he could even finish speaking, Meng Hao snorted coldly and said, "Shut the hell up." He glared at the sixth paragon, and although the words he had spoken were not filled with much force, they were infinitely cold. The sixth paragon's mind spun, and he was about to say something else when his face fell. Off to the side, the eighth paragon took a deep breath. Rumbling sounds accompanied Meng Hao's voice. When an emperor is furious, the officials will likewise be enraged. In much the same way, the surrounding ghosts seemed to lift their heads and emit enraged howls as they turned to stare at the sixth paragon. Although the sixth paragon couldn't see that, the intense feeling he was experiencing caused him to bite back his own words. Without even thinking about it, he stepped back a few paces, his face pale. An intense sensation of deadly crisis was currently raging inside of him. He had the clear and distinct sensation that Meng Hao could control his very life and death with a single thought. How could this be happening? He can force the ghosts to acknowledge allegiance and can also control them. This is impossible. Even as the sixth paragon was shaking and panting, the sect leader took a step forward and looked at Meng Hao. "Old Ninth, some light punishment is in order. After all, we're all on the same side. There's no need to allow internal strife to ferment." After a moment of silence, Meng Hao looked coldly at the sixth paragon. "In the future, keep your mouth shut when I'm talking. If you don't, I'm perfectly fine with having someone replace you as sixth paragon." The sixth paragon's face drained of blood, and although a look of venomous hatred appeared in his eyes, he said nothing in response. However, the killing intent within him grew even more intense than before. "And then there's you," Meng Hao said, turning to look at the eighth paragon. The eighth paragon took a deep breath. Forcing a smile onto his face, he clasped hands and bowed, declining to offer any words in accompaniment. Seeing such a reaction caused Meng Hao to frown. The meaning behind the words he had just spoken had been clear, and the fact that the previously aggressive sixth paragon suddenly acted in this way was very telling. To be chided by me like that, he thought, and refrain from saying anything in response indicates there is someone backing them who exceeds their power level. But who? Meng Hao thought back to everything that had happened so far, and also recalled that the vast expanse school had a total of 4 experts at the peak of the 9 essences level. The sect leader was one, but there were 3 others in addition to him. One of them was the man with the raspy voice who had spoken to him when he was in secluded meditation. As for the other 2, Meng Hao had never met them. His eyes flickered, and then his expression returned to normal. He looked around at the ghosts and waved his hands, experimentally sending out a stream of will. Instantly, the ghosts up ahead parted ways to reveal a path. Meng Hao could tell that this path was the same path he had seen earlier, which had been devoid of ghosts. Without any further delay, he led the group onward. The sect leader went along right behind him, and the other paragons followed along. They proceeded for about half a day, during which time they made more progress than the sect leader could have made in 2 days, and those would have been 2 days fraught with danger. Eventually, they reached the end of the path. A huge, shocking land mass spread out in front of them, deathly quiet and filled with ruins. There were no living beings. Everything was as silent as a graveyard. The ghosts had also been following Meng Hao, but having reached this location, they stopped and looked off into the distance. Apparently, none of them were willing to enter the land mass. Meng Hao turned back and looked at them. Although his Dao eye was now shut, he could still sense their presence. For some reason, he had the strange sensation that the bronze lamp, which was part of him now, was experiencing a feeling of sorrow. They must have been kowtowing to the previous owner of the bronze lamp. Now that I think about it, perhaps this bronze lamp once belonged to Patriarch Vast Expanse. After a moment, Meng Hao clasped hands and bowed deeply to the ghosts. The other paragons watched what was happening, and various thoughts ran through their minds. Between the end of the path and the land mass itself was a bridge, swaying there in the starry sky. One end was attached to the land mass, and the other connected to an enormous asteroid, which was fixed unmoving within the starry sky. There was a cold wind blowing that smelled of rot and decay. It was impossible to tell where it came from or where it was going. It was as if it existed eternally, and was the reason the bridge was swaying back and forth. It was very strange. Meng Hao stood there in front of the bridge for a moment, and then turned to the sect leader. Further behind were Su Yi and Xin Yue, who were completely on guard. Even they could sense that the bridge contained a strange and bizarre aura, which left them unsettled. "So we've made it back to the bridge again," the sect leader said. "We saw this same bridge twice before. This is the third time. The last 2 times we took a different path, a more dangerous path to get here." The sect leader looked at the bridge with both excitement and determination. "The previous 2 times we tried to cross it, we were blocked in the middle. The last time, we only made it about 70% of the way across. Many of our subordinates died, as did most of the clones we had created. Old Ninth, the entire reason we requested your presence was because of your Dao Eye. Please, use it to take a look at the bridge, and you'll understand." Meng Hao's eyes flashed with decisiveness, as his third eye opened up on his forehead. In that instant the world changed. The bridge was still a bridge, but on the other side the land mass bustled with cultivators. There were countless buildings, and innumerable cultivators. Now the figure which Meng Hao had seen on the distant ninth land mass was much more clearly visible. It was a man sitting on a huge throne. He was looking directly at Meng Hao, and his voice was even clearer than before. "All heaven fears the immortal. Does not want the immortal to appear, wants the demon to arrive. The variations of the demon are like the variations of heaven. The appearance of the demon requires grief. If you die, everything will be over." Meng Hao was shaken mentally by this voice which only he could hear, and when he heard the word demon uttered, his mind reeled. After a moment his eyes glittered, and he looked away from the vague figure, allowing his gaze to come to rest on the bridge. Shockingly, he saw unending gore, masses upon masses of it formed into the shape of a bridge that dripped with blood. It was a shocking sight. He saw countless arms stretching out, which occasionally performed incantation gestures, filling the bridge with the fluctuations of restrictive spells, some powerful, some weak. Surrounding the bridge was a blood-colored mist. Occasionally, eyes would appear briefly within the mist, and they stared greedily at Meng Hao and the rest of the party. Most shocking of all was that beneath the bridge was no void, but rather an abyss. Down within that abyss was a 3-headed giant, currently climbing up from the depths below. It occasionally bellowed in rage, the sound of which transformed into a tempest that caused the bridge to sway back and forth. Almost in the same moment that Meng Hao caught sight of the 3-headed giant, its 3 heads looked up, and 6 pairs of eyes came to rest on Meng Hao. Their gazes locked, and Meng Hao felt his mind reeling as an intimidating will swept through him. His eyes glittered with cold light, and he snorted, stamping his foot down and sending his divine sense crushing down. The entire bridge swayed, and the 3-headed giant let out an enraged roar that only Meng Hao could hear before looking away. "This bridge is made from flesh and blood. It's surrounded by a mist, and below is a 3-headed giant, eyeing us the way a tiger eyes its prey." As the words left Meng Hao's mouth, very serious expressions could be seen on the faces of the group behind him. The sect leader nodded and said, "This bridge is the only way onto the first land mass. Once you begin to tread it, it is possible to step off of the bridge onto either side. But if you do so and remain off the bridge for too long, you will most certainly die. There are restrictive spells on the bridge, and a false step could potentially lead to eternal destruction. A single misstep might be harmless, but as more and more false steps are accumulated, increasing levels of spell power will build up which will explode out at certain spell nodes. If that happens, we will never make it to the landmass. That is why we need your Dao Eye, Old Ninth, to see through everything hidden in the void. Help point out the way to avoid the powerful restrictive spells. In those places where we must pass through the spells, please help us select the weakest ones." With that, the sect leader clasped hands and bowed deeply to Meng Hao. "This is what we request of you, fellow Taoist. If we succeed, then I will guarantee you a place in the lineup to gain transcendence enlightenment." Chapter 1426, Bombardment of Killing Intent. Meng Hao could sense the sect leader's sincerity. As his words echoed out, the ripples of a Tao oath could be seen, indicating that he was swearing upon his own Tao that his statements were true. With the exception of the sixth and eighth paragons, the other paragons had no enmity with him. Although none of them were friends either, they still clasped hands and bowed. Meng Hao studied the bridge for a time, then nodded. By this point, his interest in the necropolis was no less than that of the sect leader, S. "Many thanks," the sect leader said in response. He took a deep breath and waved his hand, whereupon one of his 8 essences subordinates stepped forward. After clasping hands to the group, he walked up to the edge of the bridge and then looked over at Meng Hao. After a bit of study, Meng Hao identified a place on the bridge that had weak fluctuations. 9 meters in is a weak restrictive spell that can't be avoided. Further observation revealed numerous similar locations on the bridge. However, there were other areas with fluctuations so powerful he was left shaken. The bridge was not an inanimate object. It was alive, and the fluctuations of the restrictive spells grew more intense the further one went along the bridge. Apparently, the fluctuations were like flowing water that could provoke transformations amongst each other. The source of all of the restrictive spells were the arms that stretched out from the flesh and blood that made up the bridge, which were constantly performing incantation gestures and unleashing magical sealing marks. The 8 essences cultivator stepped forward and alighted onto the 9-meter position that Meng Hao had pointed to. A faint shattering sound echoed out, and the cultivator shivered. However, after a moment, he regained his composure. At the same time, Meng Hao could sense that the footfalls of the 8 essences cultivator caused the red eyes within the mist to lurch toward him. However, before they could get close, they were sent spinning away with unyielding howls. "Ahead 27 meters, Meng Hao said. The 8 essences cultivator immediately advanced to the second location indicated by Meng Hao. At the same time, Meng Hao moved forward, becoming the second person to actually step onto the bridge. That was the best way for him to be able to see the situation most clearly. In the instant he stepped onto the bridge, his third eye revealed that all of the countless arms suddenly paused, then resumed their incantation gestures with increased speed. Other than that, there was no change. Meng Hao looked around, then began to speak. Up ahead 21 meters, then another 33 meters, then 12 meters, 24 meters, 90 meters, 51 meters. Behind him came another 8 essences paragon, and then more of the group. By the time that first 8 essences cultivator reached the final location indicated by Meng Hao, there were already several people on the bridge. In addition to Meng Hao, there were even 2 9 essences paragons among the group. Clearly, these people didn't place a lot of trust in Meng Hao, and thus chose to stagger the 8 essences and 9 essences paragons. Doing so ensured that, even if Meng Hao did have some evil designs, he would only be able to take action once or twice before people caught on. As far as the subordinates were concerned, the hope of transcendence made it worth the risk. To 7 essences paragons, transcendence was something far removed from their current level. But for 8 essences experts, it was far more meaningful. Although they couldn't actually transcend, gaining enlightenment of the method would help them advance by leaps and bounds, and maybe even break through to the 9 essences level. Time passed. Meng Hao's third eye was gradually growing bloodshot, and the mental strain was increasing. The restrictive spells on the bridge were constantly changing, which in turn required constant adjustments on Meng Hao's part. At first, things went quickly, but the process eventually went slower and slower. By this point, the first cultivator to have stepped onto the bridge was about 30% across. On several occasions, the surrounding mist would surge toward the cultivators, but before it could get close was rebuffed. The roars from within the mist grew more intense, and Meng Hao's third eye more bloodshot. The 8 essences paragon up ahead of him was proceeding with an ashen face. Suddenly, he stepped a bit out of line, whereupon he coughed up a mouthful of blood and began to wither up. The mist around him cackled with joy and surged toward him. In the blink of an eye, he was on the verge of being consumed. In that moment, Meng Hao reached out with his right hand and made a grasping motion, grabbing the 8 essences cultivator and sending him back in the line. Another of the subordinate paragons gritted his teeth and flew forward to take the vanguard position. The 8 essences paragon who Meng Hao had just saved cast an appreciative glance in Meng Hao's direction. Meng Hao nodded and proceeded to make more observations. Then, the group continued on their way across the bridge. 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%. Several days later, they were 70% across the bridge. The vast expanse school had never gotten past this point in their previous efforts. By this point, One 8 essences paragon after another had been sent to the vanguard position. Eventually, it reached the point where that position was occupied by the clones of the sect leader and the other most powerful experts. Those clones were even more powerful than the 8 essences paragons, enabling them to stay in the vanguard position for longer periods of time. Soon, they crossed the 80% mark, and a few days after that had reached the 90% mark. The first land mass was no longer a distant sight. It now stretched out in front of them in all its grandeur. Excitement could be seen on the sect leader's face, and it was the same with everyone else. They yearned to cross the entire bridge and enter the necropolis of Patriarch vast expanse there on the first landmass. More time passed. The howling within the mist grew more intense, and it often surged toward the cultivators. But because they had Meng Hao leading the way, and were both bypassing the most powerful of the restrictive spells and suppressing the weak ones, the mist never had an opportunity to touch them. After passing the 99% point, the person in the lead position was less than 30,000 meters from the end of the bridge. To a mortal, it would be a vast distance, but to cultivators like this, it was a distance that could be spanned in a single step, if not for the restrictive spells in the way. We're almost there. The necropolis of the first land mass is right up ahead. We've been waiting years for this day, and now it's upon us. Everyone was very excited. As for Meng Hao, his third eye was in significant pain. Using it for such an extended period of time was apparently a serious drain on his cultivation base, and he had even been taking opportunities to rest along the way. Now that there were only about 30,000 meters left, Meng Hao began to close his third eye for some rest and recovery, when all of a sudden, an intense sensation of imminent danger exploded up within him. The source of that danger was a shadowy figure within the depths of the abyss below. It was none other than the three-headed giant. Throughout the entire trip, Meng Hao had not been able to catch a single glimpse of the giant he had seen at the outset. He had looked for it, but found no trace. But now, here it was again. No one else could see it, but they could sense an unprecedentedly cold air rising up. Meng Hao's third eye snapped back open, and the exhaustion which had been visible therein was now gone. Meng Hao was profoundly observant and insightful, and had long since come to the conclusion that the three-headed giant was simply waiting for the right moment to make a move. During the journey so far, the occasions on which Meng Hao rested because of exhaustion had actually all been an act. During the entire time, he had kept himself at peak battle readiness. The three-headed giant roared, and the cold wind grew even more icy than before, transforming into a wild tempest that knocked Meng Hao off the bridge. He ground to a halt out in the void, then snorted coldly, performing an incantation gesture with his right hand and then waving his finger toward the three-headed giant. A powerful force slammed into the giant, sending it flying back down into the abyss. Meng Hao didn't pursue it. Instead, he turned back toward the bridge. However, it was in that moment that something very unexpected happened. The 6th and 8th paragons suddenly joined forces to unleash an essence divine ability that rocketed directly toward Meng Hao. This sudden turn of events caused the sect leader's face to fall. He was about to step forward and intervene when a shadowy figure appeared next to him and reached a hand out to block his path. It was none other than the man in the sandstorm who had visited Meng Hao when he was in secluded meditation. "Shajiudong, what are you doing?" Even as a grim expression overtook the sect leader's face, the other paragons' faces flickered. Meng Hao had offered incredible assistance to them on their journey, and that was especially so for the 8 essences paragons. Meng Hao had saved all of their lives, and as such, the current development left them enraged. However, there was little time for them to put thought into the matter. 1. Shajiudong's name in Chinese is Shajiudong, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Sha is a surname which also means sand. Jiu means 9, and Dong means east. Just when they were about to take action, a figure materialized behind the 6th and 8th paragons, a young man in a golden robe, who radiated golden light. He was another of the 4 Peak 9 Essences experts from planet Vast Expanse. Killing intent swirled in his eyes as he glared at Meng Hao and extended his right hand. Golden light surged around him, and rumbling sounds could be heard as an invisible power erupted out. That was the power of the Peak 9 Essences level, and when it combined with the divine ability unleashed by the 6th and 8th paragons, it created a force that could crush anything in its path. Even as killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes, the roar of the three-headed giant once again echoed out from below as it shot upward, reaching out to grab Meng Hao. Descending from above was the combined attack of 3 paragons, Below was a seemingly invincible three-headed giant. Surrounding him was the mist, which thanks to his third eye, he could now see was surging toward him. By this point, the entities in the mist hated Meng Hao with a vengeance. If he weren't around, they would have been able to consume any number of cultivators from the bridge and would have eaten to their heart's content. But now, they hadn't succeeded even once. Roaring, they shot through the starry sky toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's face darkened. Although he had been prepared, the plot against him was excellently laid. Even still, he didn't panic. The truth was that from the moment the sixth paragon had begun to provoke him, he had guessed that there was some other powerful figure backing him. Snorting coldly, eyes swirling with killing intent, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture and unleashed demon-sealing hexing magic. He was confident that doing so could reverse the setback. Although he might not be able to fight his opponents directly, he could at least get back onto the bridge and into a position where he could be aided by the sect leader and the others. However, it was at this very moment that intense fluctuations began to emanate out from the bronze lamp. At the same time, Meng Hao could sense something calling to him from deep within the abyss, something that wanted to him to come down. All heaven fears the immortal. Come, come, come. /expand. Meng Hao's mind was reeling. The fluctuations emanating from the bronze lamp grew stronger, and it reached the point where he knew that if he missed this opportunity, it could have grave ramifications in the future. Even more shocking to Meng Hao was that, in his moment of hesitation, it almost felt as if the bronze lamp were going to burst out of him and fly down into the abyss of its own accord. He didn't hesitate for even a moment longer. Casting a cold glance at the intense golden light shooting toward him from the golden-robed young man and the sixth and eighth paragons, and looking around at the greedy, brutal figures within the mist, he suddenly shot downward. The light and the mist passed over the spot he had just occupied, and at the same time, he slammed into the giant. A huge boom rang out, and the three-headed giant screamed miserably. Blood oozed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he shot downward into the abyss, ignoring the bridge completely. Of course, to all of the other cultivators on the bridge, it didn't look like Meng Hao was intentionally heading down into the dark void below. Instead, it seemed as if the golden-robed young man and the other paragons were forcing him to do so. Sha Jiudong, Jin Yunshan, roared the sect leader, enraged. His cultivation base surged as if he were preparing to fight with the other two. 1. Jin Yunshan's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Jin Yunshan. Jin is a common surname which also means gold. Yun means cloud and Shan means mountain. However, Sha Jiudong and Jin Yunshan didn't seem willing to engage in fighting. They immediately fell back, whereupon the three of them began to confer via a method only they could participate in. Eventually, the sect leader's face flickered with disbelief and other mixed emotions. Impossible, he murmured. As for what happened after that, Meng Hao didn't care enough to pay attention. As he whistled through the void down into the depths of the abyss, he recalled what the sect leader had said about the ramifications of being off of the bridge for an extended length of time. Death would be the result, and as of now, Meng Hao was already seeing evidence of why that was the case. Astonishingly, the mists around him were growing thicker and thicker, and they were growing ever closer to him. Lurking within those mists was an aura that left his heart pounding. However, as the mists neared, the bronze lamp within Meng Hao suddenly let out a soft glow. It passed outside of Meng Hao's body, surrounding him, and when the mists touched it, countless screaming voices could be heard, as if their owners were being melted away by the light. Meng Hao settled himself. Following the tug of the bronze lamp, he continued downward. Behind him, the three-headed giant roared, apparently not frightened of the lamp at all as it pursued him relentlessly. The further down he went, the more intense the fluctuations of the bronze lamp became. Before long, Meng Hao caught sight of land down below. Most accurately speaking, it was a strip of land jutting out from the larger first landmass. Visible, there was a statue which had apparently been standing, tucked away, for countless years. It was tens of thousands of meters tall, and at first glance it almost looked like a mountain. It depicted a young man clad in a long robe who was gazing upward. A vicious expression twisted his face, and a brutal air radiated out from him. It almost seems as if he were roaring in rage, and there were even blue veins visible, bulging out all over his face. Upon further examination, Meng Hao realized that he actually resembled the figure he had seen via his third eye, the person sitting on the throne on the ninth land mass. However, this statue had a stubborn, unyielding expression, as well as an intense focus in his eyes that seemed to be boundless resentment. Faint tendrils of mist seeped out from him, which was in fact the source of the shocking mist which filled the abyss. Visible on the statue's forehead was a rift, into which someone had stabbed a sword. Whatever force was causing the bronze lamp to be stirred into action was coming from within that rift. Next to the statue was a cliff, although closer examination revealed that it was no simple cliff. It was actually an enormous gravestone. Written on the gravestone was a single line of text. "My first clone failed by all heaven." Beneath the line of text was the name of the person who had written it. Unexpectedly, it was Patriarch Vast Expanse. Meng Hao felt shaken as he looked at the statue. Although the statue seemed to have been carved out of rock, when he looked closer, it actually seemed to have been formed from flesh and blood. Before he could study the statue any further, the three-headed giant appeared. Roaring, it launched itself at Meng Hao, its eyes glowing with turbid red light. Meng Hao frowned and rotated his cultivation base. A vortex appeared around him, which rapidly transformed into a wild tempest. He stepped forward, punching out with the god-slaying fist. A boom rang out. Based on the current level of Meng Hao's battle prowess, that fist strike would cause an ordinary 9 essences expert to cough up blood. However, all it did to the three-headed giant was send it staggering backward by a few hundred meters. Roaring, it attacked again. "That's some thick skin," Meng Hao thought, frowning. Killing intent swirled in his eyes as he unleashed another attack. 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches. In the blink of an eye, he unleashed dozens of fist strikes. Intense booms rang out until finally the three-headed giant coughed up some blood. However, the brutal gleam in its eyes was even more evident than before. "Looking to die?" Meng Hao growled, waving his sleeve. Numerous mountains appeared out of nowhere, each one of which exuded shocking power as it crushed down onto the three-headed giant. Even as blood spurted out of various wounds, the giant's 3 heads let out piercing cries which became an indescribably powerful sound wave that battered against Meng Hao. A tremor ran through him and his face paled. And yet he took a step forward, then another. He took a total of 7 steps, each of which caused his energy to rise. Then, when the entire abyss seemed to be shaking violently, his finger slashed out like lightning. That finger swipe slammed into one of the giant's heads, causing it to instantly explode. The giant let out a blood-curdling scream, and the other 2 heads suddenly seemed to be struggling. For a moment the giant's eyes became clear, but then a moment later a turbid red glow took over. The giant stopped moving, looked at Meng Hao, then launched another attack. A boom rang out as massive power blasted toward Meng Hao. He fell back several paces, simultaneously performing an incantation gesture with his right hand. Then he waved his finger, unleashing the 8th demon sealing hex. Instantly, the essence of space descended. The now 2-headed giant trembled, and then began to struggle against the effects, but that was when Meng Hao closed in and waved his finger again. A huge boom rang out as another of the giant's heads exploded. There was only 1 head left, but now the turbid glow in its eyes was gone. Instead, they glowed brightly, without a trace of red, and its pupils were now visible. "All heaven," the giant suddenly said. "All heaven." Then it howled, and a pained expression twisted its face. It grabbed its remaining head with its hand as if it were slipping into insanity. "If you think you can control me, well, stop dreaming," the giant screamed. "I'm the subordinate of Vast Expanse, the god Titan." As the giant roared, an air of brutality and infinite madness radiated out, accompanied by a feeling of profound ancientness. A moment later, his clear eyes once again stirred with a turbid glow. He looked down at Meng Hao almost as if for the first time, and an expression of disbelief appeared in his eyes. "Master, is that you?" he said. Trembling, he began to charge once again in attack. "Kill me, I'm your god Titan, and I'd rather die than be controlled by all heaven. Kill me, master." Roaring, the giant headed directly toward Meng Hao, apparently making no defensive preparations whatsoever. Meng Hao was taken aback. As the giant closed in, its attack built in intensity until a windstorm raged around it. By now, the turbid redness had completely retaken its eyes. Meng Hao didn't hesitate at all. His finger shot out again, tapping the giant's forehead a 3rd time. A boom rang out, and a massive wound pierced through the giant's head. As it spread out, filling his body, he trembled. And yet the turbid glow was now gone, and his eyes were completely clear. He looked at Meng Hao, his expression one of pain and reminiscence. "So you're not my master," he murmured. "Well, thank you anyway." All heaven, all heaven." Laughing loudly, he closed his eyes and his body collapsed. Everything went silent. Meng Hao hovered there quietly for a moment, frowning. The giant's actions had been odd to say the least, and had become even more odd once the turbid glow left its eyes. Who is all heaven? All heaven fears the immortal. Something seemed off. After looking at the rift in the statue's forehead again, he approached it to examine it further. Killed by a single sword strike, he murmured. The statue itself was enormous, so naturally the rift was as well. It appeared to be at least 30 meters tall. The fact that the clone of Patriarch Vast Expanse was interred here by the Patriarch himself, the city and the land masses that became the Ghost City, the sect leader's description of the legends, and then this three-headed giant's words. What mystery is at work here? Obviously, it has something to do with the bronze lamp inside of me. Numerous speculations ran through Meng Hao's mind. After some more thought, his eyes began to glow, and he flickered into motion. Following the stirrings of the bronze lamp, he entered the rift and thus the interior of the statue. There was no flesh and blood, only a stone tunnel. At first, the tunnel sloped downward, but soon it changed direction and headed upward. As Meng Hao sped along, he felt the fluctuations in the bronze lamp growing ever stronger and the call from earlier ever closer. Several hours later, he came to a stop. Up ahead, the tunnel led into a stone cavern, on either side of which could be seen frescoes carved into the wall. The frescoes themselves were what immediately caught Meng Hao's attention. They depicted scenes from countless ages past. Innumerable living beings were depicted, and even wild beasts. All of them were prostrating themselves in worship toward the sky, toward a figure who was approaching, bathed in light. That figure looked down on all creation. His upraised right hand held within it a stretch of starry sky, within which could be seen countless heavenly bodies. As he stared at the frescoes, Meng Hao's mind and soul, everything about him, seemed drawn to the images. He almost seemed to sink into the world depicted in the frescoes. It was as if he had become one of those prostrating figures. He could sense how ancient the world around him was, and could detect the boundless nature of heaven and earth. Within his ears rang the voice of that figure which looked down upon all creation. All ye living beings shall call me, all heaven. Because of mine existence, there is the universe, and thus the starry sky, and thus the heavenly bodies, and thus all of ye people. Chapter 14:27, All ye shall call me all heaven. Chapter 14:28, The passing of ages in frescoes. Time passed, and soon Meng Hao began to tremble. His eyes grew clear, and he backed up a few steps, panting, waves of shock pounding his heart as he looked at the visions from the frescoes. All heaven, he murmured. Countless questions bubbled up in his heart, but after some thought, his eyes glittered as he left the stone chamber and proceeded along down the tunnel. Even as he shot through the tunnel, on the bridge connecting to the first land mass up above, several figures were speeding along. With Meng Hao present, that final 30,000-meter stretch would not have taken long for the cultivators of the Vast Expanse School to pass, and would have been quite safe. But with Meng Hao gone, the group finally experienced the true danger of passing through that region. After only traveling 15,000 meters, they had already experienced several casualties. Even the 9 Essences Paragons had experienced losses, all of their clones had been destroyed, and their true selves were in bad condition. In the final 15,000-meter journey, everyone drew fully on their most powerful abilities and trump cards to stay alive. With all of that, they eventually managed to reach the very end, although by that time, 3 more people had perished. Even that was only because the sect leader and the other 2 Peak 9 Essences cultivators had gone all out. Otherwise, there would have been even more casualties. In the end, all 3 Peak 9 Essences cultivators ended up ashen-faced from the effort expended. Although no words were exchanged, fury built up in the hearts of many. The stark difference between Meng Hao's presence and the lack thereof caused many in the group, including the sect leader, to feel increasing rage toward the 2 other Peak 9 Essences experts, as well as the 6th and 8th Paragons. When they finally stepped off of the bridge and onto the landmass, grim expressions could be seen everywhere. After a moment of silence, the sect leader glanced around, then looked icily at the other Peak 9 Essences experts and the 6th and 8th Paragons. We walk different paths. I won't be traveling with the 4 of you. The others snorted coldly, then followed after him. Very well, that's fine, said Jin Yunshan, smiling. Our mutual goal is the Transcendence Dais, which means they will also head there eventually. However, there must be other good fortune to be had in this place besides the Transcendence Dais. Since that's the case, we can split up here and meet back up again at the Transcendence Dais. With that, he waved his sleeve, sending a jade slip flying out to both the 6th and 8th Paragons. Then he turned and left. Shajiudong shook his head and headed off in a different direction. The sixth and eighth paragons exchanged a glance, then left with their subordinates. Meanwhile, back in the tunnel deep below the surface of the landmass, Meng Hao was speeding along. A few days later, he arrived at a second stone chamber. As soon as he entered, he looked around and found that this place also had frescoes on the walls. The frescoes depicted numerous starry skies, each of which was filled with one realm after another. There were countless heavenly bodies, countless worlds, countless forms of life. The living beings were born and died in a ceaseless cycle of reincarnation. It was almost as if time were passing in some unique way within these frescoes. There were no written words to explain what was happening, but Meng Hao could tell that what was being depicted was the passage of endless time. The figure known as All Heaven gradually began to glow with light. The light grew more and more intense until eventually his entire person was a shining beacon. Then, unexpectedly, he began to fade away. The first things to disappear were his legs, then his body, and then his head. Soon, the only part of him remaining behind to prop up the boundless starry sky was his right hand. Everything else was gone. Eventually, his palm and thumb vanished, leaving behind only 4 fingers encircling the starry sky. Gradually, all the light was absorbed into those fingers, ensuring that they didn't fade away, but rather began to thrum with life force. 4 unique auras began to stream out of them, indescribable auras that actually seemed more powerful than the figure itself when it was whole. When Meng Hao saw what was happening, waves of shock battered at his heart. "How could this be happening?" he murmured. This. Despite Meng Hao's level of willpower, he was panting. Of those 4 fingers, the second had an aura that he realized was familiar. It was a godlike aura. After a moment of confirmation, he was certain that this aura was the same as that of the statue on the immortal god continent. Furthermore, the third finger of the statue radiated the same sensation as the wild and barbaric devil realm continent, a devil-like aura. And then there was the first finger. Its aura was like an immortal S, and yet was not. It was rife with death, with the same aura as that in the necropolis of Patriarch Vast Expanse. It contained the same fluctuations as those in the ghost city. And the final finger had a demonic aura which was exactly the same as Meng Hao's. Ghost, god, devil, demon, he thought, his mind reeling as he returned from the vision he had experienced when looking at the world in the frescoes. He began to pant as he looked at the images once again, and yet couldn't enter that special vision he had just been in. His face was pale white as he stood there for a long period of time, regaining his composure. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes were shining. That figure was All Heaven. Perhaps he is not a living being, but some unique entity. Because of him, the starry sky exists, the heavenly bodies exist, all life exists. All Heaven, All Heaven. Clearly, he died, and was not a being that could last for all eternity. In the end, everything about him became 4 fingers, which are distinguished by the ghost, god, devil, and demon. But what about the immortal? Where is the immortal? After a long moment of silence, Meng Hao flickered into motion, flashing down the tunnel, burning with the desire to lay eyes on the third set of frescoes. A few days later, he was still speeding through the ancient tunnel. It almost felt as if he were passing through years of time until finally, there up ahead, was the third stone chamber. His pupils constricted, and his heart began to beat faster and faster. Almost as soon as he burst into the third stone chamber, he looked around for the frescoes. As expected, there was a third set of frescoes. When he laid eyes on them, his mind spun, and he sank into the world depicted therein. This time, the world within the frescoes depicted a place Meng Hao had seen before. It was a city, in the very middle of which were 9 land masses. This fresco depicted the necropolis of Patriarch Vast Expanse. However, this was before it had become a ghost city, back when it was still a thriving place of the living. There were countless buildings and structures, as well as innumerable cultivators. It was a bustling and flourishing place, clearly in its golden age. He saw a young man who looked very much like the statue of Patriarch Vast Expanse's clone that he had seen. Perhaps this young man was Patriarch Vast Expanse himself. He was sitting cross-legged in the air as countless lightning bolts struck down. Apparently, he was in the middle of facing tribulation. Down below in the city, countless cultivators were looking on, faces filled with anticipation. Powerful fluctuations emanated off of the young man, and when Meng Hao sensed them, he was visibly shaken. Those fluctuations exceeded the 9 essences level and were half a step into transcendence. Even more shocking was that this young man's aura contained immortal qi. Absolutely pure immortal qi. He was attempting to transcend, to pass this tribulation as the immortal. Meng Hao was panting as he looked at the city and the young man. It was then that he realized that the starry sky of the vast expanse that was depicted in this fresco had no mist in it. Instead, it was filled with countless bolts of tribulation lightning, seemingly endless amounts that crashed down toward the young man. As of this moment, heaven and earth, the starry sky, and the entire fresco seemed to flash with blinding lightning. Apparently, it was completely unwilling to let this person transcend as the immortal. As the destructive tribulation lightning descended toward the young man to wipe him out, he rose to his feet and extended his hand as if to blot out the heavens. In that moment, a beam of light fell from above, ripping the starry sky apart. A finger descended, a finger that Meng Hao recognized as one of the 4 fingers he had seen in the second set of frescoes. That finger overtook the starry sky, and its descent caused everyone in the city, regardless of the level of their cultivation bases, to begin to tremble violently. Then, they were destroyed in body and soul, completely eradicated. The only ones who survived were the young man and a handful of other people. One finger exterminated all of the life in that huge city. One finger took a thriving world and transformed it into a place of death and corpses. One finger caused a realm that was bursting with life force to, in the blink of an eye, be filled with nothing but an aura of death. The next thing that Meng Hao saw was that young man hovering there amidst the boundless aura of death, letting out a cry filled with the most profound anguish. Then the fresco changed. Unexpectedly, the corpses all began to come to life again. However, their faces were twisted with bizarre smiles as if they weren't themselves anymore. Then they began to fly up into the air toward the young man as if to kill him. The young man's bitter laughter began to transform into wretched wailing. The vision ended there. It took Meng Hao a long moment to recover. When he did, he took a deep breath and proceeded along. He wanted to see the 4th set of frescoes. He had the intense premonition that whatever was depicted on them would be something profoundly shocking and mysterious. Whatever secret was locked therein might even have something to do with him. He thought back to the destruction of the mountain and sea realm, to the demonic Shi which had appeared on him, and how it had been said that the immortal god continent and the devil realm continent didn't want the immortal to appear in the mountain and sea realm. Similar, very similar. The only difference is that patriarch Vast Expanse tried to transcend as the immortal, whereas in the mountain and sea realm, the immortal had only just appeared. Was it really the immortal god and devil realm continents who wanted to destroy the mountains and seas, or was it someone else? Why is there no text description, and why is it only possible to view the images in the fresco once? What is being guarded against? All heaven destroyed that whole world. As Meng Hao flew along toward the 4th stone chamber, his mind spun with countless ideas and thoughts. At the same time, his face grew more and more grim. By now he was getting the feeling that the destruction of the mountain and sea realm might not have been such a simple affair. Apparently, there was some profound secret at play. And Meng Hao was uncovering a bit of that secret from these wall frescoes. Chapter 1429, A Deep Look at the Vast Expanse. Meng Hao's face was grim as he shot through the tunnel at top speed. If there were someone capable of seeing everything beneath the surface of that first land mass, they would see that within the long tunnel, there were 4 stone chambers. Meng Hao was currently heading upward through the tunnel toward the surface of the lands, and at the same time, he was rapidly approaching the 4th stone chamber, which was also the final chamber. His eyes were bloodshot, and he moved at incredible speed. Countless thoughts and ideas ran through his head, and they grew increasingly disorderly. He was getting even more anxious. Some days later, the 4th stone chamber appeared up ahead of him. He slowed down, coming to a stop just outside the chamber. He stood there quietly for a long moment, taking the time to calm his mind and heart. Then he stepped into the chamber, eyes glittering. He absolutely had to see what the frescoes in this 4th chamber depicted. As soon as he stepped into the chamber and looked at the frescoes, his vision swam. When things became clear, he was looking at pitch blackness. Everything was completely and utterly black, without even a glimmer of light. It didn't feel like an infinite blackness that stretched out endlessly. Rather, it was like an obstacle, blocking the way ahead, almost like the end of the starry sky. Within that darkness, he saw 4 pillars that seemed to prop up the world. Emanating out from the pillars to spread out in all directions were shocking fluctuations. When he saw the pillars, he suddenly realized something and began to pant. He spun and was shocked to find that behind him was an enormous maelstrom. The maelstrom was so gargantuan that at first glance it looked like a huge sphere. However, closer examination revealed that the maelstrom was actually made up of endless clouds and mist. As he looked at the spherical maelstrom, he even noticed some places which looked familiar. "I'm outside the vast expanse," he murmured. Suddenly, a desire rose up within him. He focused on one particular area of the maelstrom, and his vision zoomed in, passing through layers upon layers of mist before coming to rest on an area within the vast expanse that was rife with an aura of death. A vortex could be seen there, spinning slowly. As Meng Hao looked at it, he saw an area that was tattered and torn, filled with corpses, ruin, wreckage, and ash. The mountain and sea realm, he thought, heart stabbing with pain. It was the former location of the mountain and sea realm, but everything that had happened there was nothing more than the past. After a long moment passed, Meng Hao looked away. Following the tuggings of his heart, his gaze passed in another direction, to a location where a powerful sealing magic was located. A monkey sat cross-legged outside of it, completely oblivious to Meng Hao's gaze. Beneath the monkey were numerous land masses, 33 in total. They were the 33 heavens, like 33 walls, beneath which was a vortex. Inside the vortex was a green coffin, upon which rested a butterfly, whose wings floated gently up and down. The instant he laid eyes on the butterfly, his heart thumped. He could just barely make out his father and mother there, nestled in each other's arms. His vision zoomed in again, and next he saw a world. There were many familiar faces in that world. His sister, Sun Hai, and Fatty. On one particular mountain, he saw a thin woman who was Su Qing. He wanted to see more, but inwardly, exhaustion was taking root. His vision swam and then zoomed back out, as if he were being expelled from the starry sky of the vast expanse. In the last moments before his vision completely faded away, he suddenly looked over at the vast expanse school. There, outside of planet Vast Expanse, was an area where the starry sky was damaged and in ruins. There was no vast expanse mist there, only a rift. After looking into that rift, he saw 9 land masses that formed into a necropolis. He was unable to see himself in the stone chamber in the first land mass, but he was able to see a scattered group of people. There was the sect leader, the golden-robed young man, the sand-wreathed figure, the 6th and 8th paragons, and all the others. He could see that in the very center of the first land mass, where the sect leader was currently located, was an altar which emanated a unique aura that resembled transcendence. Meng Hao was left reeling as his consciousness and sight returned to their original location. He took a deep breath as he looked at the spherical maelstrom again. Then, mind spinning, he turned once more to look at the 4 astonishing pillars. He knew exactly what those 4 pillars were. He had seen them in the vision from the second set of frescoes. They were the 4 fingers left behind by all heaven after his death. In the vision from the third set of frescoes, he had seen one of those fingers destroy a thriving world and kill all of the lives within it. So I am outside the vast expanse, and this spherical maelstrom is the vast expanse within which I exist. Panting, Meng Hao suddenly thought about something he knew which apparently conflicted with what he was seeing. The Vast Expanse School is a branch of the Vast Expanse Society, which exists on the outside. The 9th paragon even came from there. But if I am outside the Vast Expanse right now, then where is the Vast Expanse Society? Perhaps I'm in a different time. But then why would I be able to see the mountain and sea butterfly and everything else in the vast expanse? Meng Hao frowned. He wanted to get closer to the 4 pillars to study them, but when he tried to move, everything turned blurry. After things got clear again, he wasn't near the 4 pillars but back in the 4th stone chamber. In that moment, the bronze lamp inside of him quieted down. The sense of being called faded away, as if what had been reaching out to the bronze lamp was none other than this 4th set of frescoes. Now that he had laid eyes on it, the bronze lamp became calm once again. If you really are Patriarch Vast Expanse, then the message you wish to pass on to me by leaving these frescoes has been received. After a moment, Meng Hao clasped hands and bowed deeply. Now that he had experienced the visions within the frescoes, he was filled with a deep skepticism regarding the immortal gods, the devil realm, the vast expanse, and the destruction of the mountain and sea realm. There was also a name he would not be forgetting, All Heaven. And there was that saying, All Heaven fears the immortal. Meng Hao took a deep breath and rose to his feet. After closing his eyes, he calmed himself, then took the skepticism, the doubts and the misgivings and tucked them away deep inside his heart. When he opened his eyes, they seemed just like they had been before he had experienced the visions. With that, he left the chamber. Proceeding along, he soon reached the end of the tunnel, where a staircase led up to ground level. As he emerged, he looked around to find ruins stretching out around him in all directions. He was on the outer edge of the first landmass, an area filled with broken buildings and ruined structures. Everything was quiet, except for a whispering breeze which occasionally picked up the dust and carried it off into the distance. Before experiencing the visions, Meng Hao's third eye had enabled him to see the ghost city as it was in the present. But now, after having seen it when it was flourishing and alive, looking around at what remained of it caused him to sigh. Subconsciously, he looked up into the sky. That finger descended from above. One finger wiped out all life here. As Meng Hao stood there quietly, he realized how insignificant he was, and at the same time was as focused and determined as ever. After another moment passed, Meng Hao turned, transforming into a beam of light that shot at high speed across the surface of the landmass. This location was no longer unfamiliar to him. After seeing this world in his vision, he had come to know it well as where the others were located within it. In fact, after looking at the ruins and the mountains around him, he quickly determined his exact location. The sect leader and the others are at the altar in the center of the landmass. Apparently, that is their target destination. The aura of transcendence. As he flew along, his eyes glittered coldly, and he turned to look toward the east. I remember that the sixth paragon was in that area. He shouldn't be very far off. Snorting coldly, he changed directions to head toward the location of the sixth paragon. Meng Hao was not the type of person who enjoyed living for hatred and revenge. However, the sixth paragon had provoked him 3 times, and the last time had been with killing intent. Therefore Meng Hao would kill him, along with the 8th paragon and the golden-robed young man. It was a decision he made without the slightest hesitation or misgiving. After experiencing the visions he just had, he seemed calm on the inside, but was actually deeply anxious. That anxiety in turn unleashed a deep skepticism within him, something that stemmed from his guilt over the destruction of the mountain and sea realm. That skepticism and that anxiety filled him with the desire to kill. At the moment, the 6th paragon was one of the targets on his list. Meng Hao shot through the air like lightning, doing nothing to mask his aura. His cultivation base surged with power, becoming a raging tempest that formed into a face. It was a ferocious semblance of his own by about 70%. However, this face had a horn protruding from its forehead and appeared to be as cold as ice. It was brutal and shockingly demonic. Off in the distance, the 6th paragon was traveling through the ruins with his sole surviving subordinate, an 8 essences paragon. He was heading toward the central altar, but was simultaneously searching for other good fortune. Suddenly, his face fell, and he looked up to see the shocking face that resembled Meng Hao speeding toward him, bursting with a murderous aura. Damn it, you're actually not dead. His face fell as he sensed the killing intent coming from Meng Hao. His scalp tingled as he thought of the madness with which Meng Hao fought. Gasping, and without the slightest hesitation, he pulled out a jade slip to contact the golden-robed young man and the 8th paragon. Then he turned, leaving behind afterimages as he went all out in an attempt to escape. Even as the 6th paragon fled, Meng Hao's voice echoed out like thunder behind him. You brought this upon yourself, old man. Chapter 1430, Crushing the 6th paragon. As the rumbling sounds echoed out, the 6th paragon's face fell. Even as he teleported backward in retreat, the space he had just occupied was crushed and destroyed. The ground quaked and crumbled as a huge crater opened up. As Meng Hao shot forward like lightning, the vicious demon face which surrounded him picked up speed. In the blink of an eye, it was bearing down on the 6th paragon, radiating demonic chi which caused everything to shake and bright colors to flash in the area. The 6th paragon's pupils constricted, and he waved his hand out in a grasping motion. A long banner appeared in his hand, upon which were depicted the images of numerous roaring, wild beasts. Among the countless types of creatures, there were even dragons. All-consuming beast swarm, he screamed, waving the banner through the air. Instantly, the countless creatures inside the banner surged out, roaring. It was a sea of beasts which swept out toward the fierce demon face. In the blink of an eye, the two forces slammed into each other, resulting in a massive explosion which shattered the surrounding ruins and crushed the air. It was almost like 2 enormous mountains had collided, causing the ground to quake and a huge cloud of dust to rise up. Boom! Meng Hao was shaking visibly, but at the same time, the 6th paragon coughed up a huge mouthful of blood, and his banner was shredded to pieces. It was a critical moment in the fight. The sixth paragon took advantage of it to speed off, coughing up blood the entire time. Then, popping sounds could be heard as numerous ghost images appeared. Tens of thousands of shadows resembling the sixth paragon all began to scatter in different directions, making it almost impossible to determine which was his true self. The sixth paragon had tangled with Meng Hao in the past, and had long since come to fear him. Therefore, he had no intention of fighting a protracted battle, and immediately attempted to flee. Meng Hao let out a cold harumph and opened his third eye. The world changed into that of the ghost city, wherein countless figures could be seen. At the same time, Meng Hao was instantly able to determine which among the tens of thousands of shadows was the sixth paragon's true self. "You can't get away," he said coldly. As his voice echoed out, he flickered into motion, reappearing directly in front of one of the shadows. Then he unleashed a fist strike. It was the god-slaying fist. A boom rang out as the shadow shattered, and the sixth paragon emerged from within, face ashen. He immediately fell back at top speed, a vicious expression gleaming in his eyes. However, before he could escape, Meng Hao waved his finger, unleashing the eighth demon sealing hex. Because of Meng Hao's current battle prowess, the eighth hex was now strong enough to affect even 9 essences paragons. The sixth paragon's face fell as he suddenly lurched to a halt. Although he recovered almost immediately, a brief moment of immobility like that could be an eternity in a fight like this. A boom rang out as Meng Hao launched another punch toward the sixth paragon. However, in that instant, the sixth paragon's skin turned bright red, and a glow like that of blood emanated out, transforming into a shield which blocked the punch. Meng Hao's fist slammed into the blood-colored shield, causing the shield to distort, and the sixth paragon to stagger backward. However, even as he did, Meng Hao launched another fist strike, then another. Booms echoed out as the blood-colored shield struggled to hold. When the third successive fist strike hit it, the shield shattered, and the fist landed onto the sixth paragon's chest. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and a sensation of numbness swept over him like flood waters. Even his cultivation base teetered unstably, and his soul trembled. Damn it, Jin Yunshin is obviously aware that I need help, but isn't responding. Old Eighth is the only one on the way. He's not too far away, but still needs time to get here. This main character is not only a lunatic, he also excels at seizing the initiative in battle. I can't even use a full 80% of my power because he never gives me a chance to do anything. As Meng Hao closed in again, the sixth paragon let out an enraged roar. By this point, he knew that it wasn't very likely he would be able to extricate himself from the fighting. Clearly, Meng Hao was completely focused on exterminating him. In that case, it would be better to die fighting than to run away. In fact, his only hope lay in drawing out the fighting long enough for the eighth patriarch to arrive. Then the two of them could either fight or flee together. Either way, they could change the situation. "Meng Hao, you push things too far," he howled. His body was still bright red as he performed a double-handed incantation gesture. Instantly, billowing clouds appeared behind him as he unleashed all of his essence power. It transformed into a huge black head which lunged toward Meng Hao as if to swallow him whole. Meng Hao's expression was icy cold as he flickered into motion, a streak of azure light that transformed into an azure rock. The rock slammed into the black head, piercing through it and destroying it. The sixth paragon let out a miserable shriek as blood spurted from various wounds. Even as he prepared to fall back, the azure rock teleported, appearing directly in front of him and then shooting forward to blast through his body. It was an intense, deadly situation. The sixth paragon let out a roar of rage, hands flashing in a double-handed incantation gesture that caused all of the light around him to vanish. Everything turned black as he called upon his ninth essence, that of the darkness of night. The darkness of night was capable of crushing all light, of superimposing the color black onto everything and anything. All existence could be wiped out. This essence magic was the sixth paragon's trump card, and having been forced into the corner he was in, he unleashed it without any warning. However, even as the essence exploded out, causing heaven and earth to turn dark, Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He could sense the boundless killing intent that surrounded him. His body felt as if something else were controlling it, as if a boundless coldness was surrounding him and trying to bore inside of him to wipe away his soul. Meng Hao suddenly laughed and said, "Someone once tried to corrupt my body to defile my soul. I let her, so that she could be happy and at ease. And now you're trying to use a similar essence magic against me. This essence of the darkness of night can cover over heaven and earth. However, the demonic chi within me can cover over the vast expanse. With that, Meng Hao ceased struggling and allowed the darkness of night to enter his body. However, the process went too slowly for his taste, so he opened his mouth and intentionally sucked it in. Almost immediately, the darkness of night began to tremble. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao had turned into a black hole. Everything trembled as boundless darkness poured into his mouth. The sight was completely shocking, leaving the sixth paragon feeling as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes shone with disbelief and shock as he watched Meng Hao sucking the darkness of night into his mouth. Meng Hao's hair whipped about as he began to emanate an aura that the sixth paragon had never encountered before in his entire life. It was an evil aura, a multifarious aura. It was like an immortal and yet also like a god and at the same time like a devil. It changed back and forth rapidly, causing heaven and earth to tremble. As of this moment, Meng Hao was like the Tao of a world, and when he flicked his sleeve, everything began to collapse. Even more shocking to the sixth paragon was that he suddenly realized that his ninth essence was vanishing from inside of him. See consuming essence, why you? The sixth paragon was scared out of his mind. Eyes gleaming with rage, he howled as he fell back. As of this moment, he abandoned all thoughts of tangling with Meng Hao. Instead, he tried to escape with all the speed he could muster, leaving a series of afterimages behind him as he fled. Meng Hao's mouth twisted into a grim smile. Even as the sixth paragon began to flee, Meng Hao took 3 steps forward, each one of which caused everything to shake violently. After 3 steps, his energy had risen to a level that seemed to supersede the entire world. Suddenly, a sensation of indescribable deadly crisis filled the sixth paragon. He's going to kill me, he thought. He slapped his hand down onto his head. A droning sound filled his mind as he unleashed an unknown secret magic. Green smoke rose up from his red skin, increasing his speed dramatically. In the briefest of instants, he was 500 kilometers away. Killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes as he took 4 more steps. With each step, heaven and earth trembled. The 4th step took him 500 kilometers forward. Then he took the 5th and 6th steps, which were as equally grand and dramatic. The sixth paragon's face was ashen, and the sensation of deadly crisis grew more intense. He had completely lost any fighting spirit, and could sense the trump card that was his ninth essence fading away, which caused his scalp to tingle. Then he sensed Meng Hao's energy rising, and his mind began to reel as he realized that it almost felt as if he were fighting a peak 9 essences cultivator like the sect leader or Jin Yunshan. Damn it, he shrieked. That's the 7 god steps of the devil realm. He knew that the most powerful explosion of energy from the 7 god steps came from the 7th step. That raised one's mind, life force, cultivation base, and everything else to a higher level. In the blink of an eye, it would lead to an explosive, exponential increase in battle prowess. As Meng Hao took that 7th step, the 6th paragon's vision turned red. However, in that moment of deadly crisis, a beam of light appeared off in the distance, shooting toward them at high speed. The 8th paragon had arrived. Old Ninth, what are you doing? How dare you attempt to harm fellow sect members? Stand down immediately. The 8th paragon's voice echoed like thunder, and rumbling sounds caused even the clouds to vibrate as he shot forward. The 6th paragon's eyes went wild with joy, and he immediately sped in the direction of the 8th paragon. It was in that moment that Meng Hao completed his 7th step. Heaven and earth shook. The sky took the shape of Meng Hao's face, and the lands turned black. A profoundly murderous aura filled the area, converging upon Meng Hao's right hand in the form of the 8th hex essence. It was spatial hexing. Shockingly, he was preparing to completely and thoroughly seal the 6th paragon, to seal the space around him, to seal his cultivation base, and to seal his life. As soon as the sealing mark appeared, the incoming 8th paragon's face fell. Meng Hao, are you looking to die? By this point, he didn't even call Meng Hao by the title of 9th paragon, but rather by his true name. The 6th paragon's mind was spinning, and he was completely overwhelmed by the sensation of crisis. It was as if Meng Hao had superseded the entire world, and as his right hand descended, the 6th paragon screamed. You'll never seal me, Meng Hao. Apparently throwing caution to the wind, he chose to do the only thing he was capable of doing at this juncture, detonating one of his essences. Expand. The heavens roiled as boundless clouds and mist converged, forming an enormous hand that blotted out the sky. It was as if this hand had replaced the heavens, radiating an enormous, destructive sealing power. Apparently, when this hand descended, it could seal one's cultivation base, life force, soul, everything. The heaven-shaking, earth-shattering sight caused the sixth paragon's mind to reel. An unprecedented feeling of danger rose up in his heart. He was very well aware that unless he came up with some powerful countermeasure, he would definitely die. Within the starry skies of the vast expanse, 9 essences paragons were essentially invincible, with the exception of when they were within places like this necropolis, or perhaps when facing the old eccentrics who were peak 9 essences paragons. And yet, as of this moment, the shadow of death loomed large within the heart of the sixth paragon. He let out a miserable howl. At this critical point in the fighting, it was without hesitation that he chose his only remaining option to detonate one of his essences. The cost would be enormous. For the next 10,000 years, he would no longer wield the power of 9 essences, but 8 essences. He was detonating an essence in exchange for a chance to survive. If he could just avoid this deadly ceiling mark, then he could join forces with the 8th paragon. At the very least, his cultivation base drop would result in being able to live. Meng Hao, the 6th paragon howled, his voice tinged with venomous rage. Even as his voice echoed out, he spread his hands wide, causing a black and white windstorm to kick up. As it spun, it turned gray, and terrifying pulses of essence aura appeared. They were so powerful that they could cause any 8 essences paragon to tremble. That was how far the 6th paragon was willing to go in his madness to defend against Meng Hao. It was a shocking sight to see the windstorm whipping through the air toward the enormous heavenly hand. When they slammed into each other, it was like the land below smashing into the sky above. Above the heavenly hand was Meng Hao, clothes whipping about, murderous aura radiating out, an expression icy. Down below was the earthly windstorm, beneath which was the maddened 6th paragon, his hair and clothing in disarray. BOOMM. All of this takes some time to describe, but actually happened in the space of a few breaths. In the blink of an eye, the enormous hand and the wild windstorm slammed into each other. The resulting explosion seemed loud enough to destroy heaven and earth. It was as if everything in existence were being ripped to shreds. The 6th paragon screamed miserably as he detonated that single essence. Although it was only one, to him, detonating that one essence was like detonating all 9. Rumbling sounds rose up as the windstorm roared like a dragon, attempting to consume the hand. No matter how madly that windstorm screamed, though, the heavenly hand which contained Meng Hao's ceiling mark continued to shove downward. The windstorm shattered, and the power of the 6th paragon's exploding essence transformed into a shockwave that blasted out in all directions. A huge crater opened up down below, and although the hand was not completely destroyed, 4 of the fingers were wiped away in the explosion. The final finger proceeded onward unhindered. However, it had lost its power of sealing. The 6th paragon coughed up blood, and he suddenly seemed to age by 1,000 years, leaving his face pale. He felt unprecedentedly weak, but a vicious expression appeared on his face, and his eyes radiated hatred as he backed up, laughing. "You can't kill me, Meng Hao. I won't forget the enmity which you have sown this day." The hatred for Meng Hao which had been building up in the 6th paragon had reached a pinnacle. However, even as he spoke, he borrowed force from the explosion and drew upon all the power he could muster to shoot toward the 8th paragon. Likewise, the 8th paragon was speeding toward him. Once the 2 of them joined forces, then even Meng Hao with his current level of battle prowess would not be able to fight them. Meng Hao knew that, the 6th paragon knew it, and so did the 8th paragon. Seeing that the deadly battle was about to conclude, even the 8th paragon sighed with relief. In his estimation, unless Meng Hao was a complete fool, he would realize that he couldn't continue fighting. If he did, he would be putting himself in a very bad position. After all, the shockwaves which would spread out because of a fight against 2 paragons would eventually be detected by the other paragons, and when that happened, the fight definitely couldn't continue. Because of that, there was no possible way for the 8th paragon to be able to imagine what happened next. What he saw could not possibly have been more of a shock to him. What he had taken to be a complete and utter impossibility was suddenly completely possible. Meng Hao hovered there in the sky, looking coldly down at the retreating 6th paragon, as well as the 8th paragon, both of whom were racing toward each other at top speed. "If I say that I'm going to kill you, then kill you I shall," he said, voice cool and calm. His words were very similar to the ones he had spoken some time earlier to the 6th paragon about leaving his mark on him. As his voice echoed out, the 6th paragon's heart began to pound strangely within him. It was at that point that Meng Hao lifted his right foot and then took a step forward. When his foot landed, the essence of time erupted around him. He began to walk forward in a bizarre fashion, and as he did, the essence of time around him began to grow stronger. In the blink of an eye, the world around him was affected, as was time. As he took his final step, he vanished. Simultaneously, time began to move backward in the area. Not even the willpower of the sixth paragon could do anything to resist the effect. A moment ago, he had been speeding toward the eighth paragon, but now it was the opposite. He still had the same look of joy on his face, and his heart was still thumping as he suddenly began to move backward. From the perspective of the eighth paragon, it looked like he was retreating. In the blink of an eye, the sixth paragon was pulled far away from the eighth paragon. Next, the explosion caused by the collision of the essence detonation, and the heavenly hand was suddenly sucked back in. It was as if everything within the stream of time were being affected. It was at this point that Meng Hao suddenly appeared in front of the sixth paragon. It was as if Meng Hao could simply walk through time to any point of his choosing. The sight caused the eighth paragon to suddenly stop in place, scalp tingling in shock, crashes like thunder echoing in his mind. Time, the essence of time. No, the essence of time doesn't have an aura like that. That's. The eighth paragon sucked in a deep breath. His mind spun as he watched Meng Hao appear in front of the sixth paragon, then reach out and touch the man's forehead. Then his hand moved, tracing a box in the air around the sixth paragon. A boom rang out as the sixth paragon trembled. From start to finish, he was completely incapable of resisting what was happening. It was almost as if he didn't even see Meng Hao right there in front of him. He didn't fight back at all as a field of light emanating from Meng Hao's hand covered him. His body was sealed, his cultivation base was sealed, and his soul was sealed. Everything about him was sealed. Rumbling could be heard as the sixth paragon transformed into a painting, which floated down onto Meng Hao's palm. Meng Hao took hold of the painting. His cheeks were a bit flushed, but his eyes were icy cold as he turned and looked at the eighth paragon. The eighth paragon's mind was spinning, and he began to tremble. A look of utter incredulity covered his face, and terror exploded up inside of him. That's a bit of Deosaur's aura in the form of the Deosaurus of time. The eighth paragon shook as icy coldness spread up his spine and filled his body. Then he screamed and fled. Actually, this man was well aware of how powerful Meng Hao was. Even before entering the necropolis, his fight with the sixth paragon had utterly proven how terrifying he was. As such, the eighth paragon had no desire to offend him. However, because of the orders of the golden-robed young man, Jin Yunshan, he had had no choice but to attack and try to kill Meng Hao on the bridge. He, as well as everyone else, had assumed Meng Hao to be dead. After all, nobody could fall into that abyss and survive. How could he ever have imagined that Meng Hao would still be alive? After receiving the message from the sixth paragon requesting help, he had come over as quickly as possible. Upon arriving, he had witnessed a battle that was completely and utterly shocking. Then he saw Meng Hao take the impossible and make it completely possible. And he also saw something that he was sure exceeded essence, an amalgamation of space and time that exhibited a trace of the properties of Deosaurus which created a terrifying sealing mark. Planning to run? Meng Hao asked coolly. As soon as the words left his mouth, the eighth paragon's right hand shot up and he struck the top of his head. Rumbling sounds could be heard as his body withered up. Massive amounts of life force exploded out, and he even sacrificed some of his longevity in exchange for a blinding burst of speed. In the blink of an eye, he was a huge distance away. He was afraid, terrified even. All Meng Hao had to do was say one thing, and the eighth paragon went all out to flee. After all, he had witnessed the fate of the sixth paragon. Meng Hao stared in shock. The sixth paragon's method of fleeing couldn't even compare to the eighth paragon's. The eighth paragon was gone without a trace, and obviously, it wouldn't be possible to catch up in a short period of time. Meng Hao frowned. Obviously, he terrified the eighth paragon so much he had simply fled. Well, there's no rush. I'll settle accounts slow and steady. He can run, but I know where everyone is heading anyway. After a moment, Meng Hao snorted coldly and then took a step forward, heading to the location he had seen when outside of the vast expanse, the central region where the golden-robed young man and everyone else was waiting. Chapter 1431. One flees terrified. Chapter 1432. Transcendence Deus. After experiencing the destruction of the mountain and sea realm, Meng Hao had become more hateful and vindictive. His heart festered with rancor, and the thirst for revenge burned in his blood. Much of that was because he had been defiled, transformed from immortal into demon, and had become somewhat extreme and even paranoid. The current Meng Hao was a completely different person than the young scholar who had stood atop Mount Daqing in the state of Zhao. His bashfulness was nowhere to be seen now, there was only viciousness. He smiled less frequently and was filled with icy coldness. His was a world that had long since been overtaken by a murderous aura. That was not his wish, nor his fundamental nature. But fate had taken hold, and the things he had experienced were like a merciless blade that slashed away at him, completely transforming him. Sealing the sixth paragon was only the beginning. He planned to put an end to all of those who had shown hostility to him. As such, he would not let the eighth paragon off the hook. Even though the man had only attacked him once, to Meng Hao, once was enough. He would not give him a second opportunity to do so. Another person on Meng Hao's list of people to kill was the golden-robed young man, Jin Yunqian. Although Meng Hao wasn't completely certain that he qualified to attack someone of such a level right now, that didn't matter. He wasn't of a mind to investigate why things had happened the way they did. To him, only one thing was important. If you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. But if you do mess with me, then I will wipe you out of existence. Meng Hao's face was grim as he sped through the air in a beam of bright light. He moved so fast that the only sound heard was something like the crack of thunder. He was actually not visible within the beam, which resembled an arrow as it shot forward. He split the sky, moving faster and faster, the sound of his passage echoing back and forth. Invisible shockwaves spread out, causing the land to shake and the air to distort. It was a grand and amazing sight. As he chased down the eighth paragon, he was able to determine that the man was most definitely heading in the same direction Meng Hao wished to head, toward the center of this first land mass of the necropolis. As time went on, Meng Hao moved faster and faster, and the evidence of his passage was detectable far and wide. The eighth paragon was up ahead, shaking in his boots. He was completely terrified and was using all the power at his disposal to flee at top speed. He continued to unleash secret magics, causing his body to wither up, but propelling himself forward at maddening speed. Damn it, damn it, damn it, he cursed inwardly. He couldn't be more regretful of what had happened, how he had provoked Meng Hao. He could never have imagined that Meng Hao would actually possess a bit of the aura of the Deosaurs. Although it was only a sliver to someone in the 9 essences level, that was a profoundly threatening force. He's going to kill me. That was the thought which continued to run through the man's head. Meng Hao wanted to kill him so much that there was no other option for him other than to flee. He didn't even dare to turn around and try to launch a preemptive counterstrike. He had to rely on the burning of his life force to gain greater speed. His only hope was to reach the location of the sect leader and Jin Yunqian, the place where everyone was to meet back up. If Meng Hao tried to kill him in a location such as that, it would be extremely difficult considering how many people would be there to interfere. Rumbling could be heard as the eighth paragon bit his tongue, spit out some blood, and accelerated once more. Behind him was Meng Hao, his expression icy, pursuing him relentlessly. It wasn't that the eighth paragon had forgotten to try to send distress signals via Jade slip. He had. However, he quickly realized that sending such messages was like throwing a stone statue of a bull into the sea. Not a single reply ever came back. His heart was filled with bitterness and also dread. A moment later, lightning crashed down around him. Howling, he passed through the lightning, coming out on the other side coughing up blood. Without even looking back, he pushed onward. Meng Hao appeared moments later. He collected the lightning up, a cold smile on his face as he continued to chase down his prey. Time passed slowly. Hunter and quarry slowly drew closer and closer to the central region. In the middle of the first land mass was an ancient altar, fully 30,000 meters in height. The 4 corners were decorated with fierce dragon carvings, and it almost looked like a pagoda, stretching high up into the sky. It was pitch black in color, and emanated a sensation of an ancient era. It was almost as if it had existed within the stream of time for countless years. Ripples pulsed out from the altar, merging into heaven and earth, making it seem as if it were part of the entire land mass upon which it stood, and yet somehow in sync with the necropolis itself. The people from the vast expanse school were located in various locations surrounding the black altar, looking at it excitedly. There on the altar itself, 3 people sat cross-legged. One of those people was the young man in the golden robe, Jin Yunqian. Another was gaunt and sallow, surrounded by a layer of swirling sand which made it difficult to see him clearly. It was none other than Sha Jiudong. The last person was the sect leader himself. The 3 of them sat at the highest point on the altar, various expressions flashing across their faces. Occasionally they appeared to be wild with joy, while at other times they looked confused. Sometimes they would even tremble. Gradually, all of them were beginning to form tiny bits of Deosaur's aura. The other cultivators from the vast expanse school were discussing the goings-on. According to the ancient records, the necropolis has 9 land masses, each one of which has a transcendence dais. Any cultivator who seeks enlightenment on that altar can begin to grasp the path to transcendence. Those records were absolutely correct. The sect leader, along with fellow Taoists Xia and Jin, were the first to step onto the altar. They've already been seeking enlightenment for far longer than 5 days. During that time, the Deosaur's aura on them has gradually grown stronger. This place definitely contains the method for transcending. In the ancient records, it says that the altars in each of the 9 land masses of the necropolis can add 10% to one's chances of transcending. If you add the altars from all the different land masses together, then doesn't that mean that if you gained enlightenment in all 9 then, you would have a 90% chance of transcending successfully and entering the Deosaur's realm? Everyone from the vast expanse school stood outside the altar, eyes glittering with fervor. This was the entire reason they had come to this place, transcendence. To be more accurate, the method for transcendence was by means of the 9 altars within the necropolis. It was at this point, when the sect leader and the other 2 Peak 9 Essences experts were in the process of seeking enlightenment, and their Deosaur's aura was growing clearer and stronger, that a beam of light appeared off in the distance, closing in on the area with maddening speed. At the same time, a desperate voice echoed out. "Help me, fellow Taoists, please help me." The voice sounded desperate and weak. Upon closer examination, the 8th paragon could clearly be seen, hair in disarray, body gaunt and withered. His eyes were bloodshot and his aura unstable as he screamed for help. Important note, this chapter marks the beginning of a special 7 chapters in 1 day marathon that Jin did. All of the chapters are shorter than usual, which was how he accomplished that. Expect the next few chapters to be short. Chapter 1433, Killing with Witnesses. His voice completely shattered the mood in the area. The people from the vast expanse school all turned their heads, and when they saw that it was the 8th paragon heading in their direction, their faces flickered. What caused such a reaction was not just the desperate state the 8th paragon was in, but something else, something shocking that wasn't immediately noticeable. They had been studying the altar so intently that they didn't notice what else was happening in the area. Apparently, their divine sense had been sealed, and their 5 senses interfered with, although that in itself was difficult to detect. It wasn't a divine ability from Meng Hao, but rather some strange effect that came from standing near the altar. It was because they were near the altar that they hadn't received any of the messages from the 8th paragon. It's old 8th. He was in the same area as old 6th. What did he run into that left him in such bad condition? Everyone was shaken. The terrifying nature of the necropolis left a lingering fear within their hearts, and yet it was in this moment that they caught sight of another beam of light off in the distance. There within that beam of light was Meng Hao, looking like a fiendish killer. It's the 9th paragon. He's not actually dead. Everyone was shocked, but there was little time for them to ponder why he hadn't perished after falling into the abyss. Here he was, chasing down the beleaguered 8th paragon, clearly intent on killing him. The 8th paragon let out a miserable shriek as the air around him distorted, and a boom rang out, causing blood to spray out of his mouth. Afterward, he shot toward the group with even greater speed. "Help me, he killed old 6th. I saw him do it. He killed old 6th." His voice rang out, filled with unprecedented levels of anxiety and nervousness. A few of the other paragons had already stepped forward and were preparing to stop Meng Hao. There was no way they would just look on while the 8th paragon was killed. They had done the same thing with Meng Hao, and it had nothing to do with favor or disfavor. When they heard the 8th paragon's claim that the 6th paragon had already been killed by Meng Hao, their faces flickered, and they all flew forward to intervene. "Old 9th, stay your hand immediately. We're all paragons of the vast expanse school. We're here to search for the good fortune of transcendence. There's no reason to be fighting and killing each other." Even as they flew forth to block Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and he looked over at Jin Yunshan among the group of 3 on the altar. Meng Hao could sense the profoundly ancient nature of the altar, and could also detect the traces of Deosaur's aura on them. That in itself caused his mind to spin. Seeing this location from outside of the vast expanse, and actually being here to feel it, were 2 completely different matters. Now he realized that the reason the sect leader and the others had come to the necropolis, The so-called method of transcendence they were looking for was this altar. Ah, so these altars are the way to transcend, he thought. In the entire vast expanse, only a few people had ever reached that ultimate pinnacle, transcendence. For there to be a location such as this, which aided in the seeking of enlightenment of transcendence, caused Meng Hao to come to the conclusion that the other land masses must also have similar altars. 9 land masses meant 9 altars. If that was the case then, how did the altars come to be created? Many questions popped up in Meng Hao's mind, causing his eyes to flicker. However, there was no time to ponder the matter. He quickly reached out with his right hand and pointed at the fleeing 8th paragon. That gesture caused demon-sealing hexing magic to appear. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the 8th paragon trembled, during which time Meng Hao flickered into motion. Azure light rose up from him, which suddenly turned black. He transformed into a black rock, shooting lightning-like through the air to appear right behind the 8th paragon. At that point, it didn't matter that the other paragons were trying to intervene. None of them could move as fast as Meng Hao just had. Without any hesitation, he slashed out at the fleeing, weakened 8th paragon. A boom rang out, and the 8th paragon let out a blood-curdling scream. Blood spurted out of various wounds, but he continued to shoot toward the altar. Meng Hao was in hot pursuit, but the other paragons seemed to be on the verge of arriving and blocking his path. Meng Hao's eyes flickered coldly and his cultivation base surged. Essence power erupted out, transforming into a vortex, a windstorm that swept out in all directions. At the same time, Meng Hao's cold voice could be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have no enmity with you, but this 8th paragon tried to do me harm. It's a personal matter, so please don't meddle. I demand that this man die." His voice echoed out from within the windstorm with complete and utter determination. The other paragons, including Shangyu and Hong, frowned and subconsciously stopped in place. In that moment, Meng Hao shot forward with a burst of speed, yet again closing the gap between himself and the 8th paragon. The 8th paragon stared in shock. Trembling, he looked to his last source of hope, the golden-robed young man on top of the altar. "Fellow Taoist Jin, save me." Rockform Meng Hao snorted coldly. As he closed in, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and unleashed numerous hexing magics. Blood sprayed out of the 8th paragon's mouth as the hexing magics landed on him. Gritting his teeth, he pushed onward toward the altar. Just when he was about to set foot onto the altar itself, Meng Hao's right hand flashed with another incantation gesture, and he waved his finger. That was when the hexing magic began to literally explode. 8 hexes were combined together, although it happened inside of the 8th paragon's body and was not visible. Furthermore, this was not something Meng Hao had done only in this moment. He had been preparing the hexing magic and sending it into the 8th paragon during the entire chase. He wanted to kill the 8th paragon, and he wanted to do it right in front of the golden-robed Jin Yunqian, as a warning to all of the other people in the vast expanse school. It was a warning which said, "Don't provoke me." Now the moment had come to accomplish that goal. The 8th paragon screamed as numerous flows of qi battered about within him. His body began to swell, and the shadow of death exploded out within him. His expression was one of terror and astonishment as he wailed, "Fellow Taoist Jin." As soon as the words left his mouth, Jin Yunqian's eyes opened. They glittered like freezing blades as he turned to stare at Meng Hao. "Do you dare?" Chapter 1434, Battling Jin Yunqian. "I've heard that a lot in my life, you know," Meng Hao said coolly. "When the critical moment arrives, people love to say, 'Do you dare?' Apparently, they think it actually stops people from doing something. I always answer in the same way." His right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and then he waved his finger toward the 8th paragon. It was as if a fuse had been lit. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the 8th paragon's body swelled even larger and then exploded with a huge bang. Blood and gore splashed everywhere, becoming a rain that fell down onto the altar. It didn't touch the sect leader, but landed all over Sha Jiudong and Jin Yunqian. Jin Yunqian's face couldn't be grimmer as he stared at Meng Hao, killing intent swirling in his eyes. "Why don't you say it again?" Meng Hao hovered in midair, looking coldly at Jin Yunqian. Truth be told, the only reason the 8th paragon fell so easily was because the long chase gave Meng Hao plenty of time to prepare. The end result was that he cut him down quickly and efficiently. Meng Hao said he would kill him, then followed up immediately. It was all because he had buried his hexing magics inside the man one by one, resulting in that final shocking scene. Silence reigned. Xianxia Hong and the other paragons looked on silently, mixed emotions visible in their eyes as they looked at Meng Hao. Just now, Meng Hao had used his actions, not just his words, to explain to everyone what exactly it meant to be domineering. Jin Yunchen suddenly laughed in a very sinister fashion. As the sound echoed out, he slowly stood, eyes growing even icier as he stared at Meng Hao. You killed the 6th and 8th paragons, so now you want to kill me. Colors flashed in the sky, and a huge wind kicked up. Everything twisted and distorted as an enormous 5,000-kilometer windstorm appeared. Everyone from the vast expanse school had serious expressions on their faces as they slowly backed up, not daring to get close to the enraged Jin Yunchen. They were all aware that, although Jin Yunchen looked like a young man, he had actually practiced cultivation for ages upon ages, and was in fact on almost equal footing with the sect leader. He had an unstable personality inclined to fits of rage and was incredibly vicious. The louder he laughed, the more infuriated he was. That's exactly what I want, Meng Hao said coolly. When Jin Yunchen heard Meng Hao's response, it was as if he had just heard the most hilarious joke in the entire world. He threw his head back and laughed uproariously. At the same time, lightning crackled in the sky and thunder boomed. Jin Yunchen suddenly stepped forward, turning into a blur of afterimages. The space between him and Meng Hao seemed to collapse, and countless rifts opened up. Jin Yunchen moved so quickly that apparently the air couldn't withstand the speed and was destroyed. In the blink of an eye, he was directly in front of Meng Hao. You're just a stray dog with no home to go back to, and you dare to challenge me to a fight. Jin Yunchen reached out and stabbed his finger toward Meng Hao's chest. His finger immediately erupted with the intense power of a Peak 9 Essence's cultivation base. Jin Yunchen did not underestimate opponents in battle. He unleashed all of the power he had at his disposal. Although he seemed to be in a fury, he was actually in complete control of his emotions. He realized that Meng Hao had killed the 8th paragon in an attempt to rile him mentally. To cultivators of this level, something like that could prove to be fatal. In fact, the words he had spoken to Meng Hao just now had likewise been intended to sow chaos. Meng Hao remained completely calm in response to the unleashing of the finger attack. He extended his right hand and waved his sleeve, causing essence of divine flame to erupt out, combined with hexing magic as well as the power of his fleshly body. The heaven-shaking, earth-shattering power that resulted was a blow struck by an entire world. A huge boom echoed out, and Meng Hao staggered backward several paces. Even as he looked up, Jin Yunchen's eyes flickered with killing intent, and he closed in for another attack. The Peak of 9 Essences is pretty impressive. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed with the desire to fight. He burst into motion and in the blink of an eye was fighting all out with Jin Yunchen. Massive booms rang out. Meng Hao was like a monster. Sometimes he was completely domineering and pressed the attack viciously, but in his multifariousness he would then dance away like a wisp of smoke. A moment later, a brutal aura would rise up like some monstrous beast. Jin Yunchen attacked with the power of the Peak of 9 Essences. Although he didn't use any majestic divine abilities, his cultivation base and fleshly body, in fact, everything about him, was in the great circle of his level. All of it merged together, allowing him to deliver attacks that could shake heaven and earth. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged so many volleys that it was impossible to keep track of how many. Blood was oozing out of Meng Hao's mouth as he fell back. As for Jin Yunchen, his face was a bit ashen as he glared at Meng Hao, the killing intent in his eyes growing more intense. Apparently, he wasn't too surprised at Meng Hao's level of battle prowess. To him, it was only natural that Meng Hao would be beyond the ordinary 9 Essences level, considering that he had already killed the 6th and 8th paragons. You overestimate yourself, he said with a cold snort. Killing intent flickered as he waved his right hand. In response, boundless golden light shone as numerous razor-sharp golden thorns shot out. Upon closer examination, they weren't thorns, but were actual beams of golden light. In the blink of an eye, Jin Yunchen summoned a golden sun around him, which grew larger and more majestic by the moment. Everything began to shake violently. It was as if this sun had supplanted the sun of this entire world. Tao of a golden sun, magic of an exalted celestial. Jin Yunchen spread his arms wide, causing massive amounts of the energy of heaven and earth, as well as the aura of the vast expanse, to surge toward him. His energy rocketed up, and grave expressions could be seen on the faces of the group from the vast expanse as they once again backed away, unwilling to get caught up in the power on display. Even as they backed up, Jin Yunshin's hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, and he shoved them out violently. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the golden sun began to twist and distort, transforming into a seemingly endless cloud of golden flying swords. It seemed impossible to count the number of swords, and everyone present felt their scalps tingling in shock at the sight. The 9 Essences Paragons reacted a bit less dramatically, but the 8 Essences Paragons gasped. From the look of it, there were hundreds of millions of them. Hundreds of millions of golden flying swords shot out, swirling through the air to form the image of what looked like a sun. Chapter 1435, Heaven Ripping. A cold smile could be seen on Jin Yunshin's face as he spread his arms wide, sending the hundreds of millions of flying swords up into the air. Then, he lowered his hands and pointed his finger at Meng Hao. The flying swords began to vibrate loudly, the sound of which merged together into a shocking sound wave that sent everything shaking as the swords shot directly toward Meng Hao. It almost looked as if the entire sky was nothing but flying swords. Unending swords and sword light poured down onto Meng Hao as if to slice him to bits. A sense of crisis loomed within Meng Hao, but that was no surprise. In fact, it caused the desire for battle to grow more intense within his eyes. He wanted to fight someone extremely powerful, to fight many powerful people. That was how he would transform himself. Almost in the same moment that the hundreds of millions of flying swords bore down on him, azure light sprang up around Meng Hao, which then turned black. He vanished, and when he reappeared, he was an enormous black rock. The rock rapidly grew larger, 300 meters, 3,000 meters, 30,000 meters. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao was a huge black rock over 30,000 meters long. Then, a piercing cry could be heard as all of the feathers shot off of his body and swirled out into the air. Although there weren't hundreds of millions of them, there were at least a million. A million feathers spun in the air, becoming a tempest that spread out to meet the hundreds of millions of flying swords. When they clashed, the resulting boom cracked the sky and shattered the land. The rock feathers were like rowboats on a stormy sea, battered relentlessly by the flying swords. However, even as the tempest of feathers was whittled away, Meng Hao let out a powerful roar, sending some of his life force aura into the feathers. Morning Death, Divine Augmentation. This was a divine ability he had gained from Shui Dongliu when absorbing his good fortune. 1. As a brief reminder, half of Shui Dongliu was a Morning Death soul, a type of being that comes from Beseech the Devil. It was not the type of divine ability that would unleash a deadly attack. Instead, it allowed him to split his divine sense into a million portions, each of which entered one of the feathers. In the blink of an eye, each one of the million feathers trembled and then suddenly expanded. Rock heads sprouted out and then they transformed into huge rocks. Each and every feather transformed, filling the sky with a million huge rocks. The previous tempest increased in size by 1,000-fold, completely blotting out the sky. The hundreds of millions of flying swords rumbled as they slammed into the rocks. The heavens shook as the swords and the rocks began to fight a majestic battle. It was difficult to put into words how shocking this display of divine abilities was. The flying swords had the advantage of numbers by far, but the incredible power of the rocks ensured that it took hundreds of flying swords to take down just one. Massive rumbling booms filled the sky as though a war were being fought. Even as the destruction was carried out, Meng Hao suddenly appeared, blood oozing out of various wounds but a vicious expression covering his face. He suddenly lifted his hand up, and a painting appeared. It was none other than the painting he had created when he sealed the 6th paragon. Without the slightest hesitation, Meng Hao ripped that painting in half. What appeared as a result was not the 6th paragon, but rather his life force, his cultivation base, his essences, and his soul. Everything that was the 6th paragon flew out and was absorbed by the numerous rocks unexpectedly. Massive booms rang out and the world quaked. The group from the vast expanse school all gasped. This was the loudest noise which had echoed out since the fighting had begun. The rocks collapsed, and the hundreds of millions of flying swords all shattered. At the same time, a massive shockwave blasted out, sweeping across all creation. The shockwave shoved Meng Hao backward, coughing up blood, his face pale. However, his eyes were brighter than ever as he stared at Jin Yunshin, who had an unsightly expression on his face as blood seeped out of the corners of his mouth. Jin Yunshin was completely and utterly shaken. Although he had known all along that Meng Hao's battle prowess was incredible, he had never imagined that he would be this strong, or that he would be able to put up such a good fight. After all, Jin Yunshin was not just in the peak of the 9 essences level. He was at the Great Circle, which meant that his cultivation base and battle prowess were such that he could crush all other 9 essences cultivators. Not only was he shaken, everyone from the vast expanse school was flabbergasted. Is this going to be the induction of a new sage? There are only 4 peak 9 essences experts on planet Vast Expanse, and yet the 9th Paragon is actually fighting back against Jin Yunshin. Even I wouldn't have been able to stand up to that exalted celestial magic, the hundreds of millions of swords. Even as everyone was reeling in astonishment, Jin Yunshin threw his head back and laughed. The laughter was icy and vicious, and filled with intense killing intent, which became a sinister, murderous aura. Throughout all these years, you are the first person who is not in the peak of the 9 essences level to force me to use my second divine ability. Meng Hao, you can die with a smile on your face. Golden light began to shine from Jin Yunshin's eyes. He threw his hands into the air, causing a terrifying, indescribable power to radiate out of him. The crushing power contained a horrifying aura, and if you looked closely, you would see that he was sending all of his cultivation base power into his hands. His hands were gradually turning golden, as if they weren't the hands of a cultivator, but were actually made from pure gold. This divine ability is something I picked up years ago from the immortal god continent. It's called Heaven Ripping. With that, he extended his hands toward Meng Hao and made a ripping gesture. 2. Heaven Ripping is an ability Wang Lin used in Renegade Immortal. There was even an entire chapter with the exact same title as this chapter. Rumbling echoed out and the heavens shook. Meng Hao's pupils constricted. As Jin Yunshin's hand pulled apart, Meng Hao felt as if he were suddenly locked in place, fused with the air. And then, intense pain exploded out within him. Rumbling filled the air as a huge rift were tearing open, starting from above Meng Hao and stretching down. Apparently, a power capable of ripping open the starry sky was now trying to rip open Meng Hao. /expand. At this critical moment in the fight, Meng Hao suddenly unleashed a fist strike. It was none other than the life extermination fist. One fist strike could not shake the air which held him tight, so Meng Hao unleashed the second fist strike, the bedevilment fist, and then the third, the god-slaying fist. 3 punches were unleashed in quick succession, making one unified attack. As the power exploded out, he broke free from being locked in place and took a step forward. In almost that exact moment, the air around him was ripped apart. At the same time, an explosive power shot toward Meng Hao from behind. It was still the power of heaven ripping. Apparently that power wouldn't stop until Meng Hao was ripped to pieces. Meng Hao evaded, but the heaven-ripping power continued to close in on him. The air collapsed and shattered, and it almost seemed like Meng Hao would be incapable of escaping. Down below, Shang Yuan Hong and everyone else gasped, sober expressions on their faces. It wasn't that they had never seen Peak 9 Essences experts in action before. However, every time they did, they couldn't help but realize how weak they themselves were. Seeing that Meng Hao had escaped once again, Jin Yunshin called out in a voice that brimmed with murderous intentions, "Still not dead." His hands emanated boundless golden light as he once again made a ripping gesture. Rumbling sounds surrounded Meng Hao, and a sensation of deadly crisis filled him. However, he felt no fear. In fact, that sensation of danger provoked something from within the legacy of Shui Dongliu. The 3 god-slaying fists aren't enough. I need a 4th fist strike and maybe even a 5th. Countless thoughts buzzed in Meng Hao's mind, and at the same time the flickering glow of augury could be seen in his eyes. The first fist is life extermination, the second fist is self-immolation, the third fist is god-slaying, well then the 4th fist should be devil butchering. Devils are like the Dark Knight. The devil butchering fist is like a dispelling of the darkness. Meng Hao's breath came in ragged pants as he thought back to the divine ability the 6th Paragon had unleashed. That combined with previous enlightenment from past years, as well as a magical technique from within Shui Dongliu's legacy. Gradually, the outline of an idea formed in his mind. There was no time for lengthy contemplation. As the heaven-ripping power built up around him, Meng Hao's right hand clenched tightly into a fist. 4th fist strike, devil butchering. Meng Hao roared as he punched out. As the 4th fist strike was unleashed, his fist sent out black ripples which filled the area. Unexpectedly, it turned the entire area around him as black as night. Then within that pitch blackness, his fist began to shine with light. It wasn't white light, but rather red. It was as if nighttime had skin, and it was being ripped off to reveal the flesh and blood beneath. This was the fourth fist strike that Meng Hao had just now gained enlightenment of, the devil-butchering fist. It was not using dawn's light to dispel the darkness of night, rather it was skinning nighttime alive. This was true butchery. Booming sounds rang out as the light spread outward. Everywhere it passed, the darkness of night was flayed in shocking fashion. It collapsed, and even Jin Yunshan's heaven-ripping magic was completely destroyed. Meng Hao's fourth fist strike bore down on Jin Yunshan, and the golden light which had fed his power was also flayed. Booms rang out as Jin Yunshan let out a miserable shriek. His hands were trembling, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth as he subconsciously backed up. When he looked up at Meng Hao, his eyes shone with disbelief. What divine ability is that? Astonishment gripped his heart. His heaven-ripping ability was one of his trump cards, something that people normally could never break. In fact, this was the first time anything like this had ever happened. In the past, some people had powered their way through it, but this was someone breaking it on a fundamental level. Even as Jin Yunshan fell back, Meng Hao emerged from the pitch-black area, looking more than ever like he wanted to fight. His eyes glowed with red light as he strode forward, sending booms ringing out into the air. You've had your chance with your divine abilities. Now it's my turn. With that, he pointed his finger directly at Jin Yunshan, unleashing the hexing magic of the League of Demon Sealers. It was none other than the 8th hex. Instantly, space was locked down tight, causing Jin Yunshan's face to fall, and a sensation of imminent crisis to well up inside of him. Jin Yunshan didn't hesitate for a moment. His eyes glowed brightly as he bit his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. As the blood flew through the air, it transformed into a blood-colored sealing mark, which flew up and landed on his forehead. Rumbling could be heard as an aura appeared which could shake heaven and earth. As it exploded out from Jin Yunshan, it became countless bolts of lightning, each and every one of which were the color of gold. These were golden lightning bolts from a gold tribulation. At the same time, fluctuations began to emanate out from the ancient-looking blood-colored symbol. They were fluctuations which seemed to contain the passage of countless years of time, as though this symbol had existed before time even began. The fluctuations were so powerful that even the vast expanse outside of the necropolis began to tremble. At the same time, clouds began to descend. Outside of the necropolis, clouds were building up, roiling, seething clouds that were simultaneously shrinking downward toward the necropolis. In the blink of an eye, those clouds burst through whatever invisible barriers kept the necropolis hidden. Then, they appeared behind Jin Yunshan, where they began to converge into even more golden lightning bolts. A 9th essence is vast expanse tribulation lightning. I spent years gaining enlightenment of tribulation lightning, and even consumed the mist of the vast expanse to complete it. If I transcend into the Deosaurus realm, I can become the incarnation of the vast expanse's tribulation lightning. Then, all beings within the vast expanse will fear my tribulation lightning. Jin Yunshan threw his arms out wide as more and more tribulation lightning built up around him. At the same time, the aura of his 9th essence rolled about. Meng Hao's pupils constricted. He could sense how powerful this 9th essence was, and could even tell that the lightning bolts had some vague will of their own. He wasn't sure why, but an image popped up in his mind, something he had seen on the frescoes in the tunnel. He thought of all heaven destroying a world with his finger. At this moment, Meng Hao realized that the aura of the lightning, although not completely identical to the aura of all heaven's finger, was very similar. Tribulation lightning strikes. 9 essences fatality. Jin Yunshan threw his head back and roared, throwing both hands up to point at Meng Hao. Instantly, the lightning formed from the vast expanse. His 9th essence roared forth. Countless lightning bolts converged, transforming into an enormous golden finger that could shake heaven and earth. Mist swirled around it as it shot toward Meng Hao. Everything shook and the sky went dark. Chapter 1436, Fourth Fist Strike, Devil Butchering. Chapter 1437, Sealing the World-Slaughtering Finger. Lighting was a relatively simplistic essence. Many Tao realm experts would gain enlightenment of it as their first essence. One of the reasons for this was that it was relatively easy to understand. Because of that, essence of lightning was not uncommon in the starry sky of the vast expanse. Even in the mountain and sea realm or other worlds, Tao realm experts with the essence of lightning were nothing rare. However, people who transformed the essence of lightning the way Jin Yunshan had done for his 9th essence were as rare as phoenix feathers or killing horns. From this, it could be seen how grand Jin Yunshan's aspirations were. As he said, his 9th essence was not merely the ordinary essence of lightning. No, his was tribulation lightning of the vast expanse. If he did manage to transcend into the Deosource realm and become a Tao, then if his suppositions were correct, he could represent the vast expanse as the Lord of Tribulation Lightning. At that time, his level of power would be unimaginable. Although it was currently just speculation on his part, he was confident that he could do exactly that. At that moment in the fight, he could sense how strangely powerful Meng Hao's demon-sealing hexing magics were. Therefore, Jin Yunqian didn't hesitate for even a moment to call upon his ninth essence. Endless tribulation lightning merged together into the shape of a huge finger that seemed capable of destroying everything. Some of the vast expanse could even be sensed upon the finger itself, as if anything who opposed this finger also opposed the vast expanse. Rumbling could be heard as the finger smashed down toward Meng Hao. From a distance, it looked as if it were destroying the starry sky and shredding the heavens. Even as the vicious lightning bore down on Meng Hao, his hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, unleashing hexing magic. Seventh Hex. The seventh hex exploded out, combining with the power of the eighth hex which had just been utilized to lock down onto the finger. Gradually, two threads could be seen, wrapping around the finger. Based on the current level of his cultivation base, Meng Hao could now combine the 8 hexes, which was his most powerful divine ability. Everything shook violently, and the entire land mass beneath them quaked as the finger rumbled inexorably toward Meng Hao, radiating power that could destroy worlds. Meng Hao was shaking, and blood sprayed out of various wounds, as if some invisible pressure were crushing down onto him. He flickered into motion, and every step back caused the ground beneath his feet to crack and shatter. "Die!" roared Jin Yunqian. The pressure increased, and the lightning finger continued to descend toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes were crimson. He couldn't stop thinking about the vision from the fresco, but there was no time to contemplate the matter in detail. It was a critical juncture, and all he could do was perform a double-handed incantation gesture to unleash another hexing magic. Sixth hex. Fifth hex. The finger was now 30,000 meters away from him. As of this moment, the sixth and fifth hexes landed on it with a boom. The two hexing magics created two more threads which swept out to connect to the seventh and eighth hexes, further binding the finger. The finger drew ever closer to Meng Hao, whose eyes widened as world-level destructive power exploded out. It was as if the vast expanse didn't even exist anymore, and the only thing in the world was this enormous tribulation lightning finger. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth. He was completely locked down, the ground beneath his feet was being destroyed, and yet he didn't flinch. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture as he launched more hexing magics. The fourth hex appeared, and then the third, creating two more threads which wrapped around the huge finger. As of this moment, 6 threads were wrapped around it, crisscrossing over each other to form something that looked like a net. A boom echoed out as Meng Hao was shoved down again. A huge crater opened up beneath him as the finger neared to a distance of only 6,000 meters. The finger was so large it could supersede the starry sky, and yet it was targeting Meng Hao and Meng Hao alone. It didn't affect anyone else present at all. Rumbling could be heard as the finger then closed in to a distance of 3,000 meters. It was at that point that the second hex appeared, adding another thread to the net entangling the finger, making the net look ever more dense. The bones in Meng Hao's body were beginning to emit cracking sounds, but he continued to stare at the finger with ice-cold eyes that radiated killing intent. His demonic chi was normally kept hidden inside of him, but now it exploded out and his pupils turned bright red. Furthermore, an aura erupted out of him that was like an immortal but not, similar to a devil-esque but also dissimilar, comparable to a god but different. It was demonic chi. As the demonic chi spread out, the will of the vast expanse which existed on the finger suddenly seemed to seethe. And at the same time, the first land mass that they were on shuddered and began to transform. Meng Hao could sense the transformation, but didn't have the time to study it. His expression was vicious as he looked up at the finger and then began to laugh, a laughter which contained madness, murder, and impetuousness. There was something in Meng Hao's aura that caused Jin Yunqian's heart to start pounding for some unknown reason. He wasn't the only one. Everyone who was watching the fight suddenly felt particularly uneasy. It was in this moment that, all of a sudden, the sect leader opened his eyes and shouted, "Jin Yunqian, enough. Nobody can stop me from killing this man." Jin Yunqian roared in response. "Taoist vast expanse, I refuse to believe that you haven't sensed the killing intent directed at him from the necropolis itself. Killing him is conforming to the will of Patriarch Vast Expanse." He performed another incantation gesture, unleashing more power. Disregarding the fact that he was overdrawing his own power, he pushed the finger past the 3,000-meter mark until it was only 150 meters away from Meng Hao. Blood poured down Meng Hao's body from the wounds which had been inflicted. He trembled as he stood there, red with madness. By this point, the finger seemed on the verge of touching him. "First hex," he growled, waving his finger. At long last, the first hex transformed into a thread which landed on the finger. As of this moment, 8 hexing magics had transformed into threads, which in turn made an enormous net. This was the moment Meng Hao had been waiting for. He spread his arms wide, and his eyes gleamed with the desire to do battle. From the moment the battle had begun until now, he had not shown an ounce of fear. His desire to kill Jin Yunchen had not been reduced by one iota. 8 hexes combine. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, and then he waved them out. Instantly, the 8 intercrossed threads that formed the net suddenly began to shrink. As they did, they cut everything in their path. It didn't matter who stood in their way, tribulation lightning, vast expanse mist, flesh and blood, souls. Everything would be cut. Rumbling could be heard as the 8 hexes exploded into action. Meng Hao's demonic qi also erupted out, pouring into the hexing magics, transforming the 8 threads into objects sharp enough to cut anything in existence. In the briefest of moments, they sliced through the finger, which was only 30 meters away from Meng Hao's head. The finger was instantly chopped into pieces. The lightning transformed into endless sparks which scattered about in all directions. Impossible! Blood oozed out of the corners of Jin Yunchen's mouth, and his expression was one of disbelief and astonishment. "You don't qualify to kill me," Meng Hao said, flicking his sleeve. As the lightning dissipated, all the fetters holding him back vanished. Instantly, he flew forward in shocking fashion. Chapter 1438, Void Divinity Conversion. As of this moment, it wasn't just Jin Yunchen who was in a state of shock. The sect leader, who was still there on the altar, was astonished at the sight of Meng Hao's 8 hexes combined. He was well aware of how terrifying Jin Yunchen's 9th essence was. In fact, if he were in Meng Hao's place, he would have been forced to rely on his own 9th essence to negate it. And yet Meng Hao unexpectedly didn't even use a 9th essence at all. Instead, he had used what appeared to be 8 restrictive spells. The shocked sect leader couldn't help but wonder what other secrets Meng Hao must be harboring. Those 8 restrictive spells must be his first 8 essences, and yet he only needed those 8 essences to deal with Jin Yunchen's 9th essence. This Meng Hao is inhuman. The sect leader took a deep breath. Never could he possibly have imagined what the truth was. It wasn't that Meng Hao didn't want to use a 9th essence. He hadn't even gained enlightenment of a 9th essence. Jin Yunchen was just as shocked at Meng Hao's 8 hexes as the sect leader. Despite not having unleashed a 9th essence, he left them completely and utterly flabbergasted. He's still hiding his true strength. The other cultivators of the vast expanse school couldn't help but gasp. The fight which was playing out in front of their eyes left them even more intensely aware of how powerful Meng Hao was. In fact, he was so terrifying that he could probably alter the face of planet vast expanse, giving it not 4 supreme powers but 5. "I refuse to believe that you can fight me and not have to use your 9th essence." Jin Yunchen's face was twisted in an unsightly expression. By now, he held no scorn whatsoever for Meng Hao's battle prowess. Although Meng Hao was a bit weaker than him overall, the difference between them was negligible. He knew that if Meng Hao had unleashed a 9th essence, he would already be in a very difficult situation. However, even being put in a tight spot like that was preferable to what was happening now, which was that he had already gone all out with everything he had, and yet Meng Hao was still able to hold back some of his power. The thought of that caused Jin Yunchen's murderous aura to grow even more intense. He flickered into motion, transforming into a beam of golden light that shot toward Meng Hao, who also shot forward. In the blink of an eye, the two of them slammed into each other with a boom and started fighting. Meng Hao transformed into a huge rock that flickered with black and azure light. Jin Yunchen waved his hand, causing a sun to spread out, which shot countless golden beams of light out in attack. In the space of a few breaths, the two of them exchanged hundreds of volleys. Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, causing numerous mountains to crush down onto Jin Yunchen. Jin Yunchen let out a cold harumph and waved his hand. The sun detonated, sending out destructive power that shredded the mountains to pieces. In response, Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture, sending boundless essence of divine flame out in a powerful attack, destroying the air between the two of them. The battle was so intense that the entire world was affected, even the starry sky. Meng Hao and Jin Yunchen fought back and forth in midair, and the explosions caused everything to shake and distort. A closer look would reveal that Meng Hao was bleeding out of his mouth, and yet Jin Yunshan's face was pale white. He was a bit stronger than Meng Hao, but not strong enough to overwhelm and kill him. "Damn it," a boom echoed out, and Jin Yunshan shot backward, glaring at Meng Hao. Then he started laughing, a cold laughter filled with incisive killing intent. "Meng Hao, I demand to see exactly what your ninth essence is." Eyes glowing brightly, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, and then pushed both of his hands down. "Next, I will unveil the most powerful magic I have. It even exceeds the Tao of my ninth essence. Let's see if you can handle it, Meng Hao." He raised his right hand and pointed his finger up into the sky. In the moment that he raised his finger up, a stream of essence shot out, transforming into a beam of light. It shot up and merged into the sky. Next, he pointed down, and a second essence shot out from him and merged into the ground. As the two essences merged with the sky and the land, Jin Yunshan himself seemed as if he were doing the same thing. Although he still hovered there in midair, visible to the naked eye, if one scanned the area with divine sense, they would not be able to detect his existence. Meng Hao stopped in place, his eyes widening. The sense of crisis raging through him now far exceeded that when Jin Yunshan had unleashed his ninth essence. Back on the altar, the sect leader's pupils constricted, the void divinity. Next to him, Shajiudong looked on silently, eyes glowing from deep within. The other cultivators from the vast expanse school were all visibly shocked. It really is the void divinity. That's Jin Yunshan's most powerful trump card. He hasn't used it for 10,000 years. It was at this point that Jin Yunshan waved his sleeve, sending a third essence out, not into heaven or earth, but into the wind. The wind in the world became a part of Jin Yunshan, and as it swept about, it became a tempest that connected the sky to the land. "Void divinity," cried Shang Yuan Hong. "It's Jin Yunshan's Tao of the void divinity." Everyone else suddenly began to recall Jin Yunshan's legendary trump card, and their expressions flickered as they backed up even further. According to the stories which were told about the void divinity, it was a magical technique that was powerful to a terrifying degree. The sensation of deadly crisis in Meng Hao's heart was only growing more intense by the moment. His intuition was telling him that if he didn't interrupt the magic in this very instant, then its power would continue to grow explosively. His two eyes glittered as his third eye opened. In that instant, his view of the world changed. When he saw what was surrounding Jin Yunshan, his expression turned grim. He could see Jin Yunshan's body dispersing, merging into heaven and earth, becoming a part of the world. Meng Hao could tell that if he got close to him, he himself would also be sucked in by the power of heaven and earth, and be dispersed. Even as Meng Hao studied Jin Yunshan with his third eye, Jin Yunshan's expression twisted viciously, and he let out a powerful roar. Suddenly, his fourth essence expanded out, merging into one of the 5 elements that existed within this world: fire. Instantly, the temperature around him began to increase, as the fire elements in the world began to be taken over by Jin Yunshan. Things weren't over yet. His 5th essence began to merge with another of the 5 elements, metal. A killing will fill the entire world, and at the same time, a 6th essence spread out. All of the withered and dried up wood and vegetation within the world suddenly quivered, and then began to fill with life. Each and every plant and bit of grass was becoming a part of Jin Yunshan. Even more outrageous was that his 7th essence merged into all of the water in the world. Rivers raged, and the blood within the veins of everyone present began to tremble. 7 essences: metal, wood, water, fire, earth, and then there was the wind. It was as if everything in the entire world belonged to Jin Yunshan. Next was his 8th essence. As he waved his hands, it exploded it and merged into the light. Light was boundless, everywhere and all present. As of this moment, it seemed as if Jin Yunshan didn't even exist. Then, his 9th essence of lightning began to spread out, and his fleshly body began to turn transparent. 9 essences, all merged into the world around him. As of this moment, Jin Yunshan, his body, his cultivation base, his blood, his soul, everything about him had become part of the world around him. He was one with sky and the land. He was the sky, he was the land, he was the wind, he was the 5 elements, he was lightning, he was the world. "Are you mblllll?" "Meng Hao," Jin Yunshan howled. Although the words came out of his mouth, they seemed to resonate everywhere. All locations, all rivers, every part of the world was filled with his desire to kill. Flame, creatures, plants, mountains, lightning, it exploded out from everything. It was almost like the roar. not just of Jin Yunqian but of the entire world. Meng Hao inhaled sharply, and as for everyone else present, they were shaking. Meng Hao, this is my void divinity conversion. Jin Yunqian lifted his right foot up and then stamped it down. As he did, heaven shook and earth trembled. The world shook and a shocking force exploded out. Jin Yunqian was the lord of the entire world, its spirit. The world was his body, and with a thought, he could set everything into motion. The stamp of his foot was like the world stamping its foot, causing everything to shake violently. The world shuddered and the lands quaked. Jin Yunqian's right hand clenched into a fist, and then he punched out. From Meng Hao's perspective, that punch was like all of the power in the entire world converging into one spot. It contained lightning, the 5 elements, the sky, the land, everything, and it was all striking toward Meng Hao. As the fist slammed into him, heaven and earth shattered. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth and he flew backward. Still not ready to unleash your 9th essence. Jin Yunqian's killing intent had reached the pinnacle. He took another step forward, and the world shook as he slapped his right hand toward Meng Hao. The world trembled as all of the power it contained formed together. A tempest sprung up, blasting against Meng Hao before he could even stabilize himself. Blood sprayed out of his mouth and he fell back, cracking sounds emanating out of his body, his flesh mangled and torn. You still don't qualify to see my 9th essence, he growled. As he looked up, his eyes glittered and his third eye shone brightly. Intense light spilled out like a torch on a moonless night. That light transformed into a calling.